I am just a chronicler and welcome you to another video. Since I know many of you watch to relax and fall asleep, I thought it would be nice if you left a comment telling me where you're listening from and if it's raining there. Don't forget to like the video and subscribe to the channel if you're enjoying the episodes. Now, it's time to get comfortable, relax, and begin. I never thought I'd fear the sight of my elderly neighbor watering his lawn. But that was before the disappearances started. It began on a warm Tuesday evening in July. I was sitting on my porch, enjoying the last rays of sunlight and sipping a cold beer when I noticed Mr. Hendricks across the street. He was in his front yard, meticulously tending to his prized rose bushes as he did every evening. There was nothing unusual about the scene, except for the time. It was nearly 9 p.m., much later than his usual gardening hours. I waved, but he didn't seem to notice me. His movements were stiff, almost robotic, as he pruned and watered. I shrugged it off, assuming he'd lost track of time in his retirement boredom. As darkness fell, I headed inside, glancing back one last time. Mr. Hendricks was still out there, barely visible in the growing shadows. A chill ran down my spine, though I couldn't explain why. Over the next few weeks, I began to notice more odd behavior from my normally predictable neighbor. He'd be outside at all hours, sometimes just standing in his driveway, staring into the distance. Other times, I'd wake up in the middle of the night to the sound of his car starting, the headlights sweeping across my bedroom wall as he drove off. I tried to rationalize it. Maybe he had insomnia. Maybe he'd taken up stargazing. But each explanation felt hollow, failing to quell the growing unease in my gut. Then came the night that changed everything. It was well past midnight, and I was up late finishing a work project. As I shut down my computer, movement outside my window caught my eye. Mr. Hendricks was in his driveway again, but this time he wasn't alone. He was struggling with something large and heavy, trying to maneuver it into the trunk of his car. I squinted, leaning closer to the window. In the dim glow of the streetlight, I could make out what looked like a large, black garbage bag, but it wasn't moving like it was full of trash. It was squirming. My heart began to race. I told myself I was jumping to conclusions, letting my imagination run wild. But as I watched Mr. Hendricks slam the trunk shut and drive off into the night, I couldn't shake the feeling that I'd just witnessed something terrible. The next morning, I woke to police sirens. Rubbing sleep from my eyes, I stumbled to my front door. The street was lined with patrol cars, their lights painting the neighborhood in alternating red and blue. Mrs. Collins from 2 doors down was talking to an officer, tears streaming down her face. I caught snippets of their conversation. Jenny never came home. College student. My blood ran cold as I remembered the squirming bag from the night before. Over the next few days, the neighborhood was in uproar. Jenny Collins, home from college for the summer, had vanished without a trace. The police combed the area, interviewed everyone, but came up empty-handed. I wanted to tell them what I'd seen, but doubt held me back. It seemed absurd. Mr. Hendricks was in his 70s, a retired accountant who spent most of his time gardening. How could he possibly be involved in a young woman's disappearance? But as the days turned into weeks, I couldn't shake the suspicion. I found myself watching Mr. Hendricks constantly, noting every unusual movement, every late-night drive. And then it happened again. This time, it was Mr. Patel's son, Ravi, 17 years old, about to start his senior year of high school. He went out for a run one evening and never came back. The night Ravi disappeared, I saw Mr. Hendricks dragging another heavy bag to his car. I couldn't stay silent anymore. With shaking hands, I dialed the police station. Detective Sarah Martinez arrived at my house the next morning. She was younger than I expected, with sharp eyes that seemed to catch every detail as I recounted what I'd seen. I know it sounds crazy, I finished, running a hand through my hair, but I can't ignore it anymore. Something's not right with Mr. Hendricks. Detective Martinez nodded slowly. We take all leads seriously, especially with 2 missing persons cases so close together. Have you noticed anything else unusual? Any patterns to his behavior? I hesitated, then nodded. He's always been a night owl, but lately it's gotten extreme. And I trailed off, unsure how to explain the feeling of wrongness that had been growing in me. Go on, she encouraged. It's like he's a different person sometimes. The way he moves, the blank look in his eyes. It's not like the Mr. Hendricks I've known for years. Detective Martinez made a note in her pad. We'll look into it. In the meantime, keep an eye out, but don't do anything to tip him off. If he is involved, we don't want to spook him. After she left, I felt a mix of relief and anxiety. Part of me hoped I was wrong, that there was a logical explanation for everything. But deep down, I knew something sinister was happening in our quiet suburban neighborhood. That night, I couldn't sleep. Every sound had me jumping, peering out my windows. Around 2 a.m., I heard the now familiar sound of Mr. Rose Hendricks' car starting up. Heart pounding, I slipped out of bed and crept to the window. There he was, backing out of his driveway. But this time, instead of driving off, he pulled up in front of my house. I ducked down, pulse racing. What was he doing? Had he somehow figured out that I suspected him? Minutes ticked by. I heard a car door open and close, then footsteps on my front lawn. Gathering my courage, I peeked over the windowsill. Mr. Hendricks was standing in my yard, staring directly at my window. Even in the darkness, I could see the eerie blankness in his eyes. He raised his hand, pointing at me with a gnarled finger. I stumbled back, knocking over a lamp in my panic. By the time I looked again, he was gone, his car disappearing around the corner. Sleep was impossible after that. As soon as the sun rose, I called Detective Martinez. He knows, I blurted as soon as she answered. He was outside my house last night, watching me. Stay calm, she said, her voice steady. We've been monitoring Mr. Hendricks since you came to us. We may have enough to bring him in for questioning. Just sit tight and we'll handle this. But sitting tight was the last thing I could do. As the day wore on, my paranoia grew. Every creak of the house, every passing car had me on edge. By evening, I couldn't take it anymore. I needed answers. I waited until darkness fell, then slipped across the street to Mr. Hendricks' house. His car was in the driveway, but the house was dark. Moving as quietly as I could, I made my way around to the back. The back door was unlocked. Strange for a man who seemed so cautious. I hesitated for a moment, knowing I was crossing a line. But the memory of those missing young people steeled my resolve. I entered the kitchen, using my phone's flashlight to navigate. Everything seemed normal. Dishes in the sink, a half-empty mug of coffee on the counter. But as I moved deeper into the house, the air grew colder, heavy with a musty, metallic smell. In the living room, I nearly tripped over a rug that was askew. As I steadied myself, my hand brushed against the wall, finding a slight indentation. I pressed it, and to my shock, a hidden door swung open. The smell hit me first. decay and chemicals, so strong it made my eyes water. My flashlight revealed a narrow staircase leading down into darkness. Every instinct screamed at me to turn back, to run and call the police. But I knew if I left now, I might never know the truth. Taking a deep breath, I began to descend. The basement was like something out of a nightmare. Tables lined the walls, covered in jars filled with murky liquids. In the center of the room was a large metal table, its surface stained dark. And there, in the corner, was a freezer, large enough to hold a body. My hands shook as I approached it. I had to know, had to be sure. Just as I reached for the handle, a voice behind me made my blood run cold. "I was wondering when you'd find your way down here, neighbor." I spun around. Mr. Hendricks stood at the foot of the stairs, but he wasn't the frail old man I'd known for years. His posture was straight, his eyes clear and calculating. "What have you done?" I whispered, though I already knew the answer. He smiled, and it was the most terrifying thing I'd ever seen. "What I've always done, what I was created to do." Created. The word caught in my throat. Mr. Hendricks began to unbutton his shirt. "Did you really think a human could live so long without arousing suspicion? Could carry out such precise work?" As the shirt fell away, I saw not flesh, but metal and wires. This thing that looked like my elderly neighbor was a machine, an automaton of terrifying complexity. "Who? What are you?" I managed to ask. "I am the caretaker," it said, its voice no longer that of an old man, but cold and mechanical. "I maintain the balance, the young and vital for the old and decaying." It's a necessary exchange. It took a step towards me. "And now, neighbor, it's time for you to make your contribution." As it lunged for me, I finally found my voice and screamed. The next thing I knew, there was a crash from above. Detective Martinez's voice rang out, "Police, don't move." In the chaos that followed, the shouting, the struggle, the horrified exclamations of the officers as they discovered the truth about Mr. Hendricks, I sat in a daze, trying to comprehend what I'd uncovered. The quiet suburban street I'd lived on for years had harbored a monster, a machine that preyed on the young to sustain God knows what. And as I watched the police lead away the thing that had pretended to be my neighbor, I realized that the world was a far stranger and more terrifying place than I had ever imagined. Now, every time I see an elderly person tending their garden or walking their dog, I can't help but wonder, are they human, or is something else hiding behind those familiar, wrinkled faces? The forest had always been my sanctuary, until the day it tried to keep me forever. I've been an avid hiker for years, escaping to the mountains whenever life in the city became too suffocating. But nothing could have prepared me for what I encountered on that crisp autumn day in the Cascade Mountains. The trail started like any other, a winding path through towering pines, the air rich with the scent of damp earth and decaying leaves. I'd chosen a less popular route, craving solitude after a particularly stressful week at work. The further I hiked, the more the tension in my shoulders eased, replaced by the familiar rhythm of my boots on the packed dirt and the steady in and out of my breath. As the afternoon wore on, I realized I'd misjudged the trail's difficulty. The path grew steeper, riddled with loose rocks that threatened to turn an ankle with every step. I checked my map, frowning at the unfamiliar contours. Had I taken a wrong turn? The realization that I was lost crept over me slowly, like a chill seeping into my bones. The sun was dipping low on the horizon, painting the sky in brilliant oranges and pinks. but its beauty was lost on me as panic began to set in. I tried to retrace my steps, but in the fading light, every tree looked the same, every boulder a mirror image of the last. My breath came in short gasps as I spun in circles, trying to find any landmark I recognized. That's when I saw it. A flicker of light through the trees. Hope surged through me. Maybe it was another hiker's campfire, or even a ranger station I hadn't known about. I stumbled towards the light, branches whipping at my face as I pushed through the underbrush. As I broke through into a small clearing, my heart sank. It wasn't a campfire or a ranger station. It was a cabin. In the dying light, it looked ancient, its log walls weathered to a silvery gray. A small porch sagged under the weight of years, and the windows were dark, reflecting the twilight sky like vacant eyes. I approached cautiously, leaves crunching under my feet. It wasn't ideal, but with night falling fast, I knew I needed shelter. Maybe there would be a radio inside, or at least some supplies to help me get through until morning. The porch steps creaked ominously as I climbed them, and I winced at the sound breaking the forest's eerie silence. I knocked on the door, more out of habit than any real expectation of an answer. To my surprise, the door swung open at my touch, hinges groaning in protest. "Hello," I called out, my voice sounding small and afraid in the gathering darkness. "Is anyone here? I'm lost. I just need some help." Silence was my only answer. I pulled out my flashlight, its beam cutting through the gloom as I stepped inside. The cabin was a single room, sparse but not abandoned. A small pot-bellied stove sat cold in one corner, a narrow cot against the opposite wall. A rickety table and single chair occupied the center of the room. But it was what covered the walls that made my blood run cold. Symbols. Hundreds of them, carved into the wood, painted in what looked disturbingly like dried blood. Some I recognized from half-remembered history classes. Norse runes, alchemical signs. Others were completely alien, all harsh angles and unsettling curves that seemed to shift when I wasn't looking directly at them. My flashlight beam caught something on the table, a book, its leather cover cracked and peeling with age. Despite every instinct screaming at me to run, I found myself drawn to it. I reached out, my hand trembling as I opened the cover. The pages were filled with dense, spidery handwriting, interspersed with more of those unnerving symbols. Most of it was in a language I didn't recognize, but certain phrases jumped out at me in English. The veil grows thin. They whisper in the dark. The sacrifice must be made. A chill ran down my spine, and I slammed the book shut. This was wrong. All of it was wrong. I needed to get out of here, lost or not. I turned to leave, but froze as a sound reached my ears. A low, rhythmic chanting, coming from somewhere outside the cabin. It was faint at first, but growing louder with each passing second. Panic clawed at my throat as I rushed to the door, only to find it wouldn't budge. I threw my weight against it, but it was like pushing against solid stone. The chanting grew louder still, and now I could make out words, or at least, sounds that might have been words in some twisted, inhuman language. The symbols on the walls began to glow with a sickly green light, pulsing in time with the chant. I ran to the window, hoping to break the glass and escape, but the view outside stopped me cold. Figures moved in the darkness, tall and unnaturally thin, their movements jerky and wrong. As they drew closer to the cabin, I could see that what I had taken for heads were actually clusters of writhing tentacles. This couldn't be happening. It had to be a nightmare, some kind of stress-induced hallucination. I squeezed my eyes shut, willing myself to wake up. When I opened them again, the creatures were gone. The symbols on the walls had stopped glowing. The only sound was my own ragged breathing. For a moment, I dared to hope it had all been in my imagination. Then I heard it. A whisper, so close it could have been inside my own head. "Welcome, traveler. We've been waiting for you." I whirled around, my flashlight beam dancing wildly across the room. There was no one there, but the air felt thick, oppressive, as if something unseen was pressing in on me from all sides. "Who's there?" I called out, my voice cracking with fear. "What do you want?" The whisper came again, this time from behind me. "We want what we've always wanted." A way in, I spun again. But there was nothing. Just the empty cabin and those damned symbols staring down at me from every wall. "I don't understand," I said, hating how small and scared I sounded. "Please, just let me go. I won't tell anyone about this place, I swear." A chuckle rippled through the air, cold and utterly devoid of humor. "Oh, but you can't leave. You're part of this now." The final piece we've been waiting for. The symbols on the walls began to glow again, brighter this time. They seemed to be moving, flowing like liquid across the wood grain. I watched in horror as they began to coalesce into a single, massive shape in the center of the room. It was a door, or something like a door. A rectangle of absolute darkness, hanging in the air like a tear in reality itself. And from within that darkness, something was stirring. Tentacles, dozens of them, began to emerge from the inky void. They writhed and twisted, reaching out towards me with terrible purpose. I screamed then, a primal sound of absolute terror. I threw myself against the cabin door, pounding my fists against the unyielding wood until they were bloody and raw. Just when I thought all hope was lost, when I could feel those alien appendages brushing against my back, the door gave way. I tumbled out onto the porch, gasping in great lungfuls of the cool night air. I didn't stop to look back. I ran, crashing through the underbrush, branches tearing at my clothes and skin. I ran until my legs gave out and I collapsed to the forest floor, my chest heaving. As I lay there, trying to catch my breath, I became aware of a sound, the distant rumble of traffic. Somehow, impossibly, I had made it back to the main road. I staggered to my feet and began to walk, my legs shaky but propelled by the desperate need to put as much distance between myself and that cabin as possible. When a car finally appeared, I flagged it down, probably looking like a madman with my torn clothes and wild eyes. The elderly couple inside were kind enough to give me a ride to the nearest town, where I immediately went to the police station. I told them everything, about getting lost, finding the cabin, the symbols, the voices, the thing that had tried to come through that impossible door. They listened patiently, but I could see the skepticism in their eyes. They humored me, sending out a search party to the area I described. But they found nothing. No cabin, no symbols carved into trees, no signs of anything unusual at all. In the days and weeks that followed, I tried to convince myself that it had all been a hallucination brought on by dehydration and exhaustion. But deep down, I knew the truth. Something is out there in those woods, waiting, watching, and one day it will find another lost hiker, another unwitting sacrifice. And maybe next time, it will finally find its way through. I don't go hiking anymore. The forests that once brought me peace now fill me with dread, because I know that somewhere out there, hidden among the trees, there's a cabin with symbols on the walls and a door to somewhere else. And whatever lies on the other side of that door is still waiting, still hungry, And sometimes, in the dead of night, I swear I can still hear those whispers calling me back to the woods. Story 2. The moment I stepped into that abandoned factory, I knew I'd made a terrible mistake. But by then, it was already too late. I'd been desperate for a job, any job, when I saw the ad for a night security guard. The pay was decent, the hours suited me, and it seemed simple enough. Keep an eye on an old factory on the outskirts of town. Make sure no one broke in or vandalized the place. Easy money, I thought. If only I'd known. My first night started normally enough. I arrived just as the sun was setting, casting long shadows across the cracked pavement of the parking lot. The factory loomed before me, a hulking mass of corroded metal and broken windows. It had been a textile mill once, but it had stood empty for years, a relic of better economic times. The day guard, a grizzled old guy named Frank, gave me a quick tour. "Not much to it," he grunted, leading me through dimly lit corridors. "Make your rounds every hour, check the doors, watch the cameras. You see anything weird, you call the cops. Don't try to be a hero." I nodded, trying to look more confident than I felt. The place gave me the creeps, if I'm being honest. Every footstep echoed, and the air was thick with the musty smell of decay. Frank showed me to the security office, a small room crammed with outdated monitors showing grainy feeds from cameras placed throughout the factory. "You'll spend most of your time in here," he said. "Try not to fall asleep." With that, he was gone, leaving me alone in the eerie quiet of the abandoned building. The first few hours passed uneventfully. I made my rounds, clipboard in hand, checking off each area as I went. The only sounds were the occasional creaks and groans of the old building settling. It was during my third round, sometime after midnight, when things started to get weird. I was on the factory floor, sweeping my flashlight across rows of rusted machinery, when I heard it. A soft thud, like something heavy being dropped, coming from somewhere deeper in the building. I froze, listening intently. For a long moment, there was nothing but silence. Then, just as I was about to convince myself I'd imagined it, I heard it again. Closer this time. My heart began to race. Was someone in here with me? A homeless person looking for shelter, maybe, or something worse. I keyed my radio, intending to call it in, but all I got was static. Cursing under my breath, I realized I'd have to investigate on my own. I moved cautiously through the factory, my flashlight beam dancing across debris-strewn floors and graffitied walls. The sound came again, and I was able to pinpoint its source. It was coming from below me. That's when I remembered something Frank had said during the tour, almost as an afterthought. "Oh yeah, there's a basement level. It's not on the blueprints for some reason. Probably just storage. Don't worry about it." But now, faced with the undeniable evidence that something was down there, I knew I had to check it out. I found the door to the basement tucked away in a corner, half hidden behind a stack of rotting pallets. The handle turned easily under my grip, and I started down the stairs, each step creaking ominously beneath my weight. The beam of my flashlight revealed a large, open space at the bottom of the stairs. Unlike the cluttered factory above, this room was eerily empty. The concrete floor was bare, the walls unadorned. But what caught my attention was the far wall. There, barely visible in the gloom, was another door. It was made of heavy metal, with no visible handle or lock, and etched into its surface were strange symbols, unlike anything I'd ever seen before. As I approached, the air grew noticeably colder. My breath fogged in front of me, and I could feel goosebumps rising on my arms. Something about that door felt wrong, in a way I couldn't quite explain. I reached out, my hand trembling slightly, and touched the cool metal surface. The moment my fingers made contact, a jolt ran through me like an electric shock. I stumbled back, gasping, and that's when I heard it. A voice, barely more than a whisper, coming from behind the door. "Help us," it said. "Please, let us out." I scrambled away, my heart pounding so hard I thought it might burst from my chest. This couldn't be happening. It had to be some kind of trick, a prank by the other guards maybe. But deep down, I knew it wasn't. Whatever was behind that door was real, and it was not of this world. I turned to run, to get as far away from that accursed door as possible. But as I reached the bottom of the stairs, I heard a terrible grinding noise. The door to the upper level was closing, seemingly of its own accord. I sprinted up the stairs, taking them two at a time, but I was too late. The door slammed shut with a final, definitive thud. I pushed against it with all my strength, but it wouldn't budge. I was trapped. Panic threatened to overwhelm me as I pounded on the door, shouting for help. But I knew it was useless. No one would hear me down here. Behind me, the whispering grew louder. More voices joined the first, a cacophony of pleas and demands. "Free us," they hissed. "Open the door. Let us in." I slid down the wall, covering my ears, but it did nothing to block out the voices. They seemed to be inside my head now, growing more insistent with each passing moment. Hours passed, or maybe it was days. Time lost all meaning in that dark basement. I drifted in and out of consciousness, the voices my constant companions. In my more lucid moments, I tried to make sense of what was happening. What were these entities behind the door? Why were they trapped? And why had they chosen me? But there were no answers, only more questions. And always, always, the voices. I'm not sure how long I'd been down there when I heard it. The sound of the upper door opening. Hope surged through me. Had someone come looking for me? But as footsteps descended the stairs, I realized with growing horror that they weren't coming to rescue me. The steps were too deliberate, too purposeful. A figure emerged from the gloom, and I felt my last shred of hope die. It was Frank, the day guard, but not as I had known him. His eyes were blank, pupilless orbs, and his movements were stiff, unnatural. "It's time," he said, in a voice that was not his own. "The sacrifice has been prepared." He grabbed me, his strength inhuman, and began dragging me towards the metal door. I fought with everything I had, screaming, clawing at the concrete floor, but it was useless. As we neared the door, the symbols began to glow with an otherworldly light. The whispering had become a roar, filling the air with promises of power and threats of unimaginable torment. Frank pressed my hand against the door, and I felt that same electric jolt. But this time, it didn't stop. Energy coursed through me, and I watched in horror as the symbols on the door began to appear on my skin, burning themselves into my flesh. The pain was excruciating, but even worse was the feeling of something alien entering my mind, pushing aside my thoughts, my memories, my very sense of self. In that moment, I understood. I wasn't meant to be a sacrifice. I was meant to be a vessel. The door began to open, revealing a swirling vortex of darkness beyond. Tentacles of shadow reached out, wrapping around me, pulling me in. As the last of my consciousness faded, I had one final, terrifying thought. I was going to be the one who opened the way for them. Whatever horrors lay beyond that door, I was going to be the one to unleash them upon the world. And then, Mercifully, everything went black. I woke up in a hospital 3 days later, with no memory of how I'd gotten there. The doctors told me I'd been found wandering the streets, babbling incoherently. They said I was lucky to be alive, but I don't feel lucky, because even though I can't remember what happened in that basement, I know something changed. Sometimes I catch glimpses of impossible things out of the corner of my eye. I hear whispers in empty rooms, and at night I dream of a metal door covered in glowing symbols, slowly opening to reveal the darkness beyond. I don't know what's coming, but I know it's my fault. And I know that when it finally arrives, nowhere will be safe. So if you were ever offered a job as a night security guard at an abandoned factory, my advice is simple: run. Run as far and as fast as you can. Because some doors are meant to stay closed, and some secrets are better left buried in the dark. Story 14. The first text message seemed innocent enough. The 100th made me realize I was living in a waking nightmare. It started on a Tuesday, a day like any other. I was at my favorite coffee shop, nose buried in a book I'd been meaning to finish for weeks. My phone buzzed, and I absent-mindedly checked it, expecting a message from a friend, or maybe my mum. Instead, it was from an unknown number. "Nice book you're reading." I glanced up, scanning the cafe. No one seemed to be paying any attention to me. Just the usual mix of students hunched over laptops and professionals grabbing a quick caffeine fix. I shrugged it off as a wrong number, or maybe a friend playing a prank. But then another message came through. "The latte looks good too. You always did like extra foam." A chill ran down my spine. I put my book down, no longer able to focus on the words. This time, I looked around more carefully, but still saw no one watching me. I quickly gathered my things and left, suddenly feeling exposed in the cozy cafe that had always been my sanctuary. On the walk home, I tried to rationalize it. Maybe it was just a coincidence, or a friend who had spotted me and was messing around. But deep down, I knew something wasn't right. That night, I tossed and turned, unable to shake the feeling of being watched. Just as I was finally drifting off, my phone lit up with another message. "Sweet dreams." I barely slept after that. The next day brought more messages, each one more unsettling than the last. "That red blouse really brings out your eyes. You should eat more than just an apple for lunch. Your boss seemed upset in that meeting. Hope everything's okay." Every aspect of my day, no matter how mundane, was being observed and reported back to me. I changed my phone number, thinking that would solve the problem. It didn't. The messages kept coming, now from a variety of numbers. I went to the police, but they were frustratingly unhelpful. Without any direct threats, they said there wasn't much they could do. They suggested I change my routines, be more aware of my surroundings, as if I hadn't already been doing that. Paranoia set in quickly. I started checking for hidden cameras everywhere I went. At home, at work, even in public restrooms. I taped over the cameras on my devices and bought signal blockers online, but nothing seemed to stop the flow of messages. My friends started to notice the change in me. I was jumpy, constantly looking over my shoulder. I stopped going out, afraid of giving my stalker more ammunition. When I did have to leave the house, I would take convoluted routes, doubling back and changing directions randomly. But it didn't matter. They always knew where I was, what I was doing. "The park is lovely this time of year, isn't it? You should take more walks. Your friend Sarah seems worried about you. Maybe you should call her back. That new security system you installed looks expensive." Shame it won't help. Weeks turned into months, and the messages became a constant backdrop to my life. A running commentary on every moment, every decision. I felt like I was losing my mind. How could someone know so much about me? How could they always be watching? I became a shell of my former self. I lost weight, my hair started falling out from the stress. Dark circles took up permanent residence under my eyes. But still, the messages came. You really should eat more. You're looking pale. Nightmares again. Poor thing. That therapist won't be able to help you. But I can. That last one broke something in me. I had been seeing a therapist in secret, not telling anyone, paying cash. And still, they knew. I decided I had to do something drastic. I quit my job, sold most of my possessions, and bought a car with cash. I didn't tell anyone where I was going. I just drove, hoping to outrun the nightmare my life had become. For a blissful few hours, there were no messages. I started to feel a glimmer of hope. Maybe I had finally escaped. Then my phone buzzed. Road trips can be so relaxing. Enjoy the scenery. I almost drove off the road. How could they still be watching me? I pulled over at the next rest stop, my hands shaking so badly I could barely turn off the engine. I sat there, staring at my phone, willing it to stay silent. But of course, it didn't. You look tired. Maybe you should rest here for the night. Tears of frustration and fear streamed down my face. There was no escape. No matter where I went, what I did, they would always find me. In that moment of despair, something inside me snapped. If I couldn't run from this, maybe I could confront it head-on. With trembling fingers, I typed out a reply for the first time. "Who are you? What do you want from me?" The response came almost immediately. "Look outside your window." My heart leapt into my throat. Slowly, terrified of what I might see, I turned to look out the driver's side window. There, in the dim light of the rest stop parking lot, stood a figure. They were too far away to make out clearly, but I could see they were holding a phone. Without thinking, I got out of the car. My legs felt weak, but I forced myself to walk towards the figure. As I got closer, I realized it was a man, probably in his late 30s. He looked ordinary, not at all what I had imagined my tormentor would look like. "Why?" I asked, my voice barely above a whisper. "Why are you doing this to me?" He smiled, and it was the most terrifying thing I had ever seen. "Because I can," he said simply. "But how?" I demanded, anger finally breaking through my fear. "How do you always know where I am, what I'm doing?" He held up his phone. "It's amazing what you can do with technology these days. Hacking into cameras, phones, computers. It's child's play if you know what you're doing." I felt sick. "You've been watching me through my own devices." He nodded, looking almost proud. "And everyone else's. Security cameras, traffic cams, even other people's phones. You'd be surprised how much of your life is captured on camera without you realizing it." "But why me?" I asked, still struggling to understand. "What made you choose me?" His smile faded, replaced by a look of intense focus. "You were perfect. Alone, trusting, your whole life laid out online for anyone to see. You made it so easy. I wanted to run, to scream, to fight. But I was rooted to the spot, captivated by the casual cruelty of this man who had destroyed my life." "What do you want?" I asked finally. "Money, information." He laughed, a cold, humorless sound. "I don't want anything from you. This isn't about want, it's about power. The power to know everything about someone, to control their life without them even realizing it. You were just an experiment. The realization hit me like a physical blow. All this pain, all this fear, and it was just a game to him. A way to prove he could do it. In that moment, something changed. The fear that had been my constant companion for months evaporated, replaced by a white-hot rage. "No more," I said, my voice steady for the first time in what felt like forever. "This ends now." Before he could react, I grabbed his phone and smashed it on the ground. Then I turned and ran back to my car, my heart pounding in my ears. As I sped away, I half expected to see him chasing after me, or to hear my phone buzz with another message. But there was nothing, just the sound of the engine and my own ragged breathing. I drove through the night, putting as much distance between myself and that rest stop as I could. When the sun finally rose, I found a small town and checked into a motel under a fake name. For the first time in months, my phone stayed silent. No messages, no updates on my every move. The relief was overwhelming, but I knew it wasn't over. He was still out there, and there were probably others like him. I knew I could never go back to my old life. That person, the trusting, open book I used to be, was gone. In her place was someone harder, more cautious. Someone who understood the dark underbelly of our connected world. As I sat in that motel room, watching the sun climb higher in the sky, I made a decision. I would use what I had learned from this nightmare to help others. To teach them how to protect themselves in a world where privacy is an illusion and anyone can become a target. My tormentor had chosen me because I was an easy target. I would make sure I was never that vulnerable again. And I would do everything in my power to make sure no one else had to go through what I did. The messages had stopped, but my journey was just beginning. And this time, I would be the one in control. Story 3. The night I accepted a ride from a stranger was the night I almost became another statistic. But sometimes, survival comes down to nothing more than raw instinct and sheer will. It was just past midnight, and I was stranded on a lonely stretch of highway somewhere between nowhere and not much else. My old Chevy had finally given up the ghost, sputtering to a halt in a plume of steam and the acrid smell of burning oil. I popped the hood, but the tangle of wires and metal might as well have been alien technology for all the sense it made to me. With a sigh, I pulled out my phone, already knowing what I'd see. No signal, of course. I was miles from the nearest town, and out here, cell towers were about as common as palm trees in Alaska. I leaned against my car, watching the occasional headlights appear on the horizon, grow blindingly bright, then disappear into the darkness behind me. Each passing vehicle ignited a spark of hope that quickly fizzled out, as they sped by without slowing. Just as I was contemplating the wisdom of trying to walk to the next town. How far could it be, really? A pair of headlights appeared in the distance, but these were different. They were slowing down. Relief washed over me as an old semi-truck pulled onto the shoulder, its brakes hissing as it came to a stop. The driver's door opened, and a man hopped down from the cab. He was tall and burly, with a beard that would make a lumberjack jealous. "Car trouble?" he called out, his voice gravelly but not unkind. I nodded, gesturing helplessly at my steaming vehicle. "Yeah, I think it's finally kicked the bucket for good this time." He ambled over, peering under the hood with the practiced eye of someone who knew their way around an engine. After a few minutes of poking and prodding, he straightened up, wiping his hands on his jeans. "Well, I've got good news and bad news," he said. "Bad news is, This thing ain't going nowhere without a tow and some serious work. Good news is, I'm headed to the next town over. I can give you a lift if you want. I hesitated. Every instinct honed by years of stranger danger, lectures screamed at me to decline. But what choice did I have? I couldn't stay here all night, and walking along a dark highway seemed even more dangerous than accepting a ride. That would be great, thank you, I heard myself say. He introduced himself as Mike and helped me grab my overnight bag from the back seat. As we walked to his truck, I noticed for the first time just how massive it was. The cab loomed above me like a metal giant. Mike opened the passenger door and gestured for me to climb in. It was a struggle. Clearly, these trucks weren't designed with short people in mind, but I managed to haul myself up and into the seat. The interior of the cab was surprisingly cozy. A small bed was tucked behind the seats, and various trinkets dangled from the rearview mirror. Mike climbed in beside me, and with a roar of the engine, we were off. At first, the ride was uneventful. Mike kept up a steady stream of small talk, asking about my job, where I was headed, the usual polite conversation between strangers. But as the miles rolled by, I began to notice little things that set my nerves on edge. It started with the way he kept glancing at me when he thought I wasn't looking. There was something in his eyes, a hunger that made my skin crawl. Then I noticed his knuckles, white with tension as he gripped the steering wheel. I tried to shake off the feeling, telling myself I was just being paranoid. But then I saw it. A glint of metal poking out from under his seat. It looked suspiciously like the handle of a knife. My heart began to race. I casually glanced around the cab, looking for anything I could use as a weapon if needed. That's when I saw the photographs. They were partially hidden under a map on the dashboard, but I could make out enough to turn my blood to ice. They were pictures of women, dozens of them, and in each photo, the women looked terrified. Mike must have noticed my gaze because he quickly reached out and shoved the photos out of sight. Just some old family pictures, he said, his tone casual but with an undercurrent of threat. I nodded, trying to keep my face neutral even as panic threatened to overwhelm me. This wasn't a kind stranger offering a ride. This was a predator who had found his next victim. My mind raced, trying to figure out a plan. I couldn't jump out. At this speed, it would be suicide. I couldn't overpower him. He was twice my size. I needed to be smart. I needed to survive. I forced myself to stay calm, to keep up the pretense of casual conversation. All the while, I was watching, waiting for any opportunity. It came sooner than I expected. Mike announced he needed to make a quick stop to refuel. As we pulled into a dimly lit gas station, I saw my chance. "Do you mind if I run to the restroom?" I asked, trying to keep my voice steady. Mike hesitated, then nodded. "Make it quick," he growled. I climbed down from the cab on shaky legs, willing myself not to run. Not yet. I had to play this smart. The gas station was deserted except for a bored-looking attendant behind the counter. I walked to the bathroom, acutely aware of Mike's eyes on me the whole way. Once inside, I locked the door and let out a shaky breath. My hands were trembling as I pulled out my phone. Still no signal. Of course. I looked around frantically, searching for a window, an alarm, anything. But the tiny bathroom offered no escape route. A heavy knock on the door made me jump. "Hurry up in there." Mike's voice boomed. "Just a minute," I called back, my mind racing. I looked at myself in the grimy mirror. This was it. Whatever I was going to do, it had to be now. Taking a deep breath, I unlocked the door and stepped out, Mike was right there, looming over me. "Took you long enough," he grumbled, grabbing my arm. As he started to pull me towards the truck, I made my move. I stumbled, letting my body go limp. Mike, caught off guard, loosened his grip for just a moment. It was all I needed. I wrenched my arm free and sprinted towards the store, screaming at the top of my lungs. "Help! He's trying to kidnap me!" The attendant, jolted from his boredom, looked up in shock. Mike lunged for me, but I was quicker, fueled by pure adrenaline. I vaulted over the counter, putting the stunned attendant between me and my would-be captor. "Call the police," I yelled, grabbing the attendant's phone. Mike's face contorted with rage. For a terrifying moment, I thought he might try to come after me. But then the sound of a siren cut through the night air. Someone had heard my screams. With a curse, Mike turned and ran, disappearing into the darkness beyond the gas station's fluorescent lights. The next few hours passed in a blur of police statements and cups of bad coffee. The attendant, a college kid named Alex, kept apologizing for not realizing something was wrong sooner. I assured him he had nothing to be sorry for. He had been there when I needed help, and that was what mattered. As dawn broke, painting the sky in soft pinks and golds, a police officer approached me with news. They had found Mike's truck abandoned a few miles down the road. Inside, they discovered evidence linking him to a string of disappearances across 3 states. I should have felt relieved, but all I felt was numb. The reality of how close I had come to becoming another one of his victims was starting to sink in. In the days and weeks that followed, I struggled to come to terms with what had happened. Nightmares plagued my sleep, and every passing truck on the highway made my heart race. But slowly, I began to heal. I sought therapy, joined a support group for survivors of attempted abductions. I learned that what I was feeling, the fear, the anger, the guilt, was normal. And I learned that I was stronger than I had ever imagined. I also made a decision. I couldn't change what had happened to me, but I could use my experience to help others. I started volunteering with organizations that work to prevent human trafficking. I shared my story, hoping it might save even one person from going through what I did. That night on the highway changed me forever. It taught me that evil can wear a friendly face, that danger can lurk in the most unexpected places. But it also taught me about resilience, about the power of quick thinking and sheer determination. I'm not the same person I was before I got into that truck. I'm warier, yes, but I'm also braver. I know now that I can face my worst fears and come out the other side. And if sharing my story helps even one person stay safe, then maybe, just maybe, some good can come from that terrifying night. So if you're ever stranded on a dark highway, remember my story, trust your instincts, stay alert, and know that no matter how dire the situation seems, there's always hope. Because sometimes, survival comes down to nothing more than raw instinct and sheer will. And those, as I learned, are more powerful than we can ever imagine. Story 4. The moment I opened that locked door in the basement, I knew I'd stumbled into something far darker than I could have ever imagined. But by then, it was too late to turn back. It all started when my wife, Sarah, and I decided to move out of our cramped city apartment. We'd been saving for years, dreaming of a place with a yard for our kids to play in, and maybe even a home office for me. When we found the old Victorian house on Maple Street, it seemed perfect. Sure, it needed some work, but the price was right, and we could see the potential beneath the peeling wallpaper and creaky floorboards. The day we moved in was a whirlwind of boxes, furniture, and excited chatter. Our two kids, Emma and Jake, raced from room to room, claiming spaces and imagining adventures. Sarah was already planning color schemes and furniture arrangements. And me, I was just happy to see my family so excited. It wasn't until things quieted down that evening that I noticed the door. I was in the basement, unpacking some boxes, when my flashlight beam caught something odd. There, hidden behind a stack of old paint cans, was a door. It was small, maybe 4 feet high, and looked much older than the rest of the house. The wood was dark with age, and an antique padlock hung from a rusted hasp. Curiosity got the better of me. I called up to Sarah, "Hey, honey, did the realtor mention anything about a locked door down here?" Her voice floated down the stairs, distracted and distant. "What? No, I don't think so." "Why?" I stared at the door, a strange feeling settling in my gut. "No reason. Just wondering." I tried to put it out of my mind, focusing instead on a million other things that needed doing in a new house. But over the next few days, I found myself drawn back to that door. I'd find excuses to go to the basement, always ending up in front of it, studying the worn wood and tarnished metal. Sarah noticed my preoccupation. "What's going on with you?" she asked one night, after the kids were in bed. "You've been distracted ever since we moved in." I hesitated, then told her about the door. To my surprise, she laughed. "Is that all? It's probably just an old coal chute or something. This house is ancient, remember?" Her casual dismissal should have reassured me. Instead, it only intensified my fascination. Why was the door so small? And why lock it if it was something as mundane as a coal chute? A week after we moved in, I couldn't take it anymore. I waited until Sarah took the kids to the park, then grabbed my tools and headed to the basement. The padlock was old, but it was no match for my bolt cutters. With a satisfying snick, it fell to the floor. My heart was pounding as I pulled the door open. The hinges creaked in protest, sending up a small cloud of dust. I coughed, waving it away, and shone my flashlight into the darkness beyond. What I saw made my blood run cold. The space behind the door was small, maybe 6 feet square, but it wasn't empty. Far from it. The walls were covered, floor to ceiling, with photographs. Hundreds of them, maybe thousands, yellowed with age, but still clearly visible in the beam of my flashlight. With shaking hands, I reached out and plucked one from the wall. It showed a young woman, maybe in her early 20s, smiling at the camera. She was standing in front of this very house, the porch recognizable, even though the paint was a different color. The photo was dated 1953. I grabbed another. This one showed a middle-aged man, his expression serious, seated in what I recognized as our living room. The date, 1972. Photo after photo, all of different people, all in or around this house. Some were clearly taken without the subject's knowledge. People caught in private moments, unaware they were being watched. And all of them had one chilling thing in common: a small X marked in the corner. As I flipped through the photos, my horror growing with each image, I noticed something else. In many of the pictures, barely noticeable unless you were looking for it, was a shadow. A figure, just out of frame, watching. My hands were shaking so badly I could barely hold the flashlight. I swept it around the room one last time, and that's when I saw it. In the far corner, partially hidden behind a stack of photos, was a camera. An old Polaroid, the kind that printed photos instantly. I reached for it, my curiosity overriding my fear for a moment. As I picked it up, something fluttered to the floor. Another photo. With a sense of dread, I bent to retrieve it, and found myself staring at my own face. It was me, taken just a few days ago, unpacking boxes in the living room. I remembered the moment clearly. I had been alone, Sarah and the kids out getting groceries. In the corner of the photo was the same X I had seen on all the others. The realization hit me like a physical blow. Whatever had been watching the inhabitants of this house for decades was still here, still watching. And now, it was watching us. I stumbled out of the small room, slamming the door behind me. My mind was reeling, trying to make sense of what I had seen. I had to tell Sarah, had to get my family out of this house immediately. I was so lost in my panic that I almost didn't notice the figure standing at the top of the basement stairs. It was Sarah, but not Sarah. Her posture was wrong, too stiff and upright. And her eyes were empty, devoid of the warmth and life I knew so well. "You shouldn't have opened that door," she said, her voice flat and emotionless. "Now we'll have to start over." Again, I backed away, my heart pounding so hard I thought it might burst from my chest. "Sarah, what's going on? Where are the kids?" Her head tilted to the side, an unnatural, jerky movement. "The children are fine. They always adapt so quickly. But you're going to be a problem." She started down the stairs, her movements smooth and purposeful. I looked around frantically for a weapon, anything to defend myself. My eyes fell on an old baseball bat leaning against the wall. I lunged for it, gripping it tightly as I faced the thing wearing my wife's face. "Stay back," I warned, my voice shaking. "I don't want to hurt you." It laughed, a chilling sound that bore no resemblance to Sarah's warm chuckle. "Hurt me? Oh, my dear. You have no idea what you're dealing with." As she reached the bottom of the stairs, her form seemed to shimmer and blur. For a moment, I saw something else behind the facade of my wife. Something ancient and terrifying, with too many eyes and limbs that bent in impossible ways. I swung the bat blindly, more out of panic than any real hope of defending myself. To my shock, it connected with a solid thud. The thing that wasn't Sarah stumbled back, a look of surprise crossing its stolen features. I didn't wait to see what would happen next. I ran, taking the stairs 2 at a time, my only thought to find my children and get out of this house. I burst into the living room, calling out for Emma and Jake. Their voices answered from the kitchen, sounding normal, unafraid. Had they been spared whatever had taken Sarah? As I rounded the corner into the kitchen, my hope turned to ash. My children were there, but their eyes held the same empty look I had seen in Sarah's. They turned to me in unison, their movements too coordinated to be natural. "Daddy," Emma said, her voice a haunting sing-song, "why did you have to look behind the door?" "We were so happy here." Single quotes Jake, nodded a grotesque parody of a child's movement. "Now we have to make you forget." Like all the others, I backed away, my mind unable to process what I was seeing. This couldn't be real. It had to be a nightmare. But as I felt a hand close around my arm, cold and strong and decidedly not human, I knew this was all too real. I turned to see Sarah, or the thing that had been Sarah, standing behind me. "Don't worry, dear," it said, its voice a twisted echo of my wife's. "Soon, this will all just be a bad dream, and then we can be a happy family again. For a little while, at least." As darkness closed in around me, my last coherent thought was of the photos in that hidden room. All those faces, all those lives. How many times had this happened before? And how many more times would it happen in the future? The last thing I saw before consciousness slipped away was a flash of light. Another photo for the collection. Another X to be marked. Another family consumed by the hungry darkness that lived within the walls of the house on Maple Street. And then, mercifully, I knew no more. Story 11. The forest had always been my sanctuary, until the night had tried to claim me for its own. I'd been an avid camper for years, escaping to the wilderness whenever the chaos of city life became too much. The solitude, the connection with nature. It was my therapy. So when I planned a solo camping trip to celebrate my 30th birthday, I thought nothing of it. Just another adventure in the great outdoors. If only I'd known what was waiting for me in those woods. The day started perfectly. I arrived at the campsite mid-afternoon, the late summer sun warming my skin as I set up my tent. The spot I'd chosen was beautiful. A small clearing surrounded by towering pines with a babbling creek nearby. As I worked, I breathed in the scent of pine needles and damp earth, feeling the tension of the past few months melt away. By evening, I had a cozy camp set up. I sat by my small fire, enjoying a simple dinner of canned soup and watching the stars appear one by one in the darkening sky. The only sounds were the crackling of the fire and the gentle rustling of leaves in the breeze. It was perfect. As night fell completely, I decided to turn in early. I had a long hike planned for the next day and wanted to get an early start. I doused the fire, made sure my food was secured in a bear-proof container, and crawled into my tent. I'm not sure what woke me. One moment I was deep in dreamless sleep. The next I was wide awake, every nerve in my body on high alert. I lay still, straining my ears, trying to figure out what had disturbed me. At first, I heard nothing out of the ordinary, just the normal nighttime sounds of the forest. But then, there, a rustling. Too big to be a small animal, too deliberate to be the wind. My heart began to race. Bear, mountain lion. My mind conjured images of every dangerous predator that could be lurking in these woods. I reached for my flashlight, my hand trembling slightly. Whatever was out there, I needed to see it. I took a deep breath, unzipped the tent flap, and shone the light outside. The beam cut through the darkness, illuminating nothing. Just trees and underbrush. I swept the light around, looking for any sign of movement, but saw nothing unusual. I was about to chalk it up to an overactive imagination when I noticed something odd. There, on a tree at the edge of my campsite, was a strange marking. It looked like a symbol of some kind, carved into the bark. I could have sworn it hadn't been there earlier. Curiosity overrode my fear. I slipped on my boots and cautiously stepped out of the tent, keeping my flashlight trained on the tree. As I approached, I could see the symbol more clearly. It was unlike anything I'd ever seen before, a complex swirl of lines that seemed to hurt my eyes if I looked at it too long. A twig snapped behind me. I whirled around, my heart leaping into my throat. Again, nothing was there. But now I noticed another marked tree on the opposite side of my camp. My breath came in short gasps as I spun in a slow circle, my flashlight beam revealing more and more marked trees. They formed a perfect circle around my campsite. How had I not noticed this before? A whisper of movement caught my eye. Just beyond the circle of light, something darted between the trees. It was too fast, too fluid to be human, and far too large to be any animal I knew. Panic seized me. I had to get out of here. I dove back into my tent, grabbing my backpack and shoving in whatever I could reach. To hell with breaking camp properly. I needed to leave. Now, as I worked, the sounds outside grew louder. Rustling, snapping twigs, and something else. A low, rhythmic chanting in a language I didn't recognize. I burst out of the tent, backpack half-zipped, and clutched to my chest. The chanting stopped abruptly. The forest was eerily silent. My flashlight flickered, the beam growing weaker. No, not now. I fumbled with it, slapping it against my palm, but it was no use. With a final, pitiful glow, it went out. The darkness that engulfed me was absolute. No moonlight penetrated the thick canopy above. I couldn't even see my hand in front of my face. That's when I heard it. A sound that will haunt me for the rest of my days. It was a voice, but not human. It was as if the forest itself was speaking. The words formed from rustling leaves and creaking branches. "Welcome, traveler," it said, the sounds seeming to come from everywhere at once. "We've been waiting for you." I ran. I had no idea which direction I was going, but I ran as if my life depended on it. Because I was terrifyingly certain that it did. Branches whipped at my face. Roots seemed to reach up to trip me. But I kept going, driven by pure animal fear. Behind me, I could hear something pursuing. Many somethings. Their movements were swift and sure, unbothered by the darkness that blinded me. I ran until my lungs burned and my legs felt like lead. Still, I pushed on. I had to find a way out of these woods. Just when I thought I couldn't go on, my foot caught on a root and I went down hard. I tumbled down a slope, leaves and twigs scratching my skin, until I came to a bruising stop at the bottom. Dazed and winded, I lay there for a moment. The sounds of pursuit had faded. Had I lost them? As my eyes adjusted to the gloom, I realized I could see again. A faint, grey light was filtering through the trees. Dawn was approaching. I pushed myself up, wincing at my battered body, and looked around. My heart sank. I was in another clearing, almost identical to my campsite. And there, carved into the trees around me, were those same bizarre symbols. "No," I whispered, despair washing over me. "No, this can't be happening." "Oh, but it is," came that terrible forest voice again. "You can't escape us. This is our domain." Shapes began to emerge from between the trees. Tall, impossibly thin figures, their bodies seeming to shift and change as they moved. They were like nothing I'd ever seen before, nothing I could have even imagined. They drew closer, their featureless faces turned towards me. I scrambled backwards until my back hit a tree. There was nowhere left to run. As the nearest figure reached out a branch-like arm towards me, a shaft of sunlight suddenly broke through the canopy. It hit the creature directly, and to my amazement, it recoiled with a hiss of pain. The sunlight was driving them back. Hope surged through me. I looked up, seeing more rays of light breaking through as the sun rose higher. The forest creatures retreated to the shadows, their unearthly voices rising in what sounded like frustration or anger. I didn't wait to see what would happen next. I ran again, this time towards the growing light. The trees began to thin, and suddenly I burst out of the forest onto a road. A car was approaching. I waved my arms frantically, probably looking like a madwoman with my torn clothes and wild eyes. To my eternal gratitude, it slowed to a stop. An elderly couple peered out at me, concern etched on their faces. "Are you all right, dear?" the woman asked. I shook my head, tears of relief streaming down my face. "Can you please give me a ride to the nearest town?" I got lost in the woods. They didn't ask questions, just opened the door and welcomed me in. As we drove away, I couldn't help but look back at the forest. In the morning light, it looked perfectly normal, peaceful, even. But I knew the truth of what lurked within. The authorities never found my campsite. According to them, I had wandered miles from any established camping areas. They put it down to me getting lost and panicking, my wild story a result of dehydration and exhaustion. But I know what I saw, what I experienced. Those symbols still haunt my dreams, and sometimes, when the wind blows through the trees just right, I swear I can hear that voice again. I don't go camping anymore. The forest is no longer a sanctuary for me, because now I know that sometimes the monsters in the woods are all too real. And they're always hungry for unwary travelers who stray into their domain. So if you're ever in the woods and see strange symbols carved into the trees, don't investigate. Don't try to understand. Just run. Run and pray the sun rises before they catch you. Because in the deep, dark heart of the forest, there are things that should never see the light of day. And once they've marked you as their own, they'll never truly let you go. Story 5. I never thought I'd fear the sight of my own home. But as I stood on the porch, key in hand, I knew something was terribly wrong. The house I'd left this morning was no longer just a house. It had become something else entirely. It all started innocently enough. My best friend, Jenny, had asked if I could house sit for her and her husband while they took a much-needed vacation. "It'll be easy," she'd said. "Just water the plants, feed the cat, and enjoy a week in our big, fancy house." How could I say no? The first few days were great. I worked from their home office during the day, enjoying the change of scenery from my cramped apartment. In the evenings, I'd lounge by their pool or binge-watch shows on their massive TV. It was like a vacation for me too. But on the 4th day, things started to get odd. I was in the kitchen, fixing lunch, when I heard a noise from upstairs. It sounded like footsteps, slow and deliberate. My heart rate picked up. I was supposed to be alone in the house. "Hello?" I called out, trying to keep my voice steady. "Is someone there?" Silence. I grabbed a knife from the counter and slowly made my way upstairs, my pulse pounding in my ears. I checked each room, tensed for, well, I wasn't sure what. But I found nothing. No signs of an intruder. No open windows. Just empty rooms and silence. I tried to shake it off. Old houses make noise, right? It was probably just the pipes or the house settling. But then it happened again that night. I was reading in bed when I heard it. The unmistakable sound of a door closing downstairs. I froze, the book slipping from my fingers. This time, I didn't call out. I didn't want to alert whoever or whatever was down there. I crept out of bed, grabbing my phone and dialing 911, my finger hovering over the call button. I made my way down the stairs, each creak of the floorboards sounding like a gunshot in the silence. When I reached the bottom, I saw it. The back door was open, swaying gently in the night breeze. I was sure I'd locked it before going to bed. The police came, did a thorough search, but found nothing. No signs of forced entry, nothing missing. They chalked it up to me forgetting to lock the door and my imagination running wild. I nodded, smiled, thanked them for their time. But I knew I hadn't imagined it. The next day, I called Jenny. I tried to keep my voice casual as I asked if anything. strange had ever happened in the house. Strange. She laughed. Like what? Oh, you know, I said, aiming for nonchalance. Weird noises, things moving on their own, that sort of thing. There was a pause on the other end of the line. When Jenny spoke again, her voice was different. Guarded. No, nothing like that. Why do you ask? I brushed it off, made up some excuse about watching too many horror movies, but I couldn't shake the feeling that she wasn't telling me everything. That night, I couldn't sleep. Every creak, every whisper of wind sounded sinister. I tossed and turned, my mind conjuring images of shadowy figures lurking in corners, watching me. It was nearly dawn when I heard it. A soft click, like a camera shutter. I sat bolt upright, my eyes scanning the dimly lit room. And there, in the corner, I saw a red light blinking. A camera. My blood ran cold. How long had that been there? Had it been recording me this whole time? I got up, my legs shaky, and went to investigate. But as I got closer, the light disappeared. When I reached the corner, there was nothing there. No camera, no sign that anything had ever been there at all. I sank to the floor, my head in my hands. Was I losing my mind? The next day passed in a haze of paranoia. I jumped at every sound, flinched at every shadow. I searched the house from top to bottom, looking for hidden cameras, microphones, anything that could explain what was happening. I found nothing. As evening fell, I decided I couldn't stay another night. I'd call Jenny, make up some excuse, and leave. But when I reached for my phone, it wasn't where I'd left it. I searched everywhere, growing more frantic by the minute. It was gone. That's when I saw it. A flashing light coming from under the guest room door. The door I was sure had been open just moments ago. With trembling hands, I reached for the doorknob. It turned easily, the door swinging open to reveal my phone. Sitting in the middle of the bed, screen lit up with a new message. From Jenny. My heart pounding, I picked it up and read, "We see you. We've always seen you." The words blurred as tears filled my eyes. This couldn't be happening. A noise behind me made me whirl around. The closet door was opening, slowly, revealing a small room I was sure hadn't been there before. A room filled with monitors, each showing a different part of the house. And in the center, a chair, empty, waiting. I ran, out of the room, down the stairs, out of the house. I didn't stop until I reached my car, fumbling with the keys, desperate to get away. As I sped down the street, I glanced in the rearview mirror. Jenny's house stood silent and dark, revealing nothing of the horrors within. But I swear I saw a figure in the upstairs window, watching me go. I drove straight to the police station, my story spilling out in a jumbled mess of words. They listened patiently, but I could see the doubt in their eyes. No, they couldn't search the house without evidence of a crime. No, a missing phone and some strange noises weren't enough for a warrant. Yes, they'd look into it, but maybe I should get some rest. I was clearly upset. I checked into a motel that night, too afraid to go back to my own apartment. What if they had bugged that too? What if nowhere was safe? Sleep eluded me. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw that room full of monitors. I couldn't shake the feeling that even now, someone was watching me. The next morning, my phone buzzed with a text. From Jenny. "Where are you? We came home early and you're not here. Is everything okay?" I stared at the message, my mind reeling. They were home, already. Had it all been in my imagination, after all? With shaking hands, I called her. When she answered, her voice was cheery, normal. She asked about the house, the cat, thanked me for watching things. Not a word about hidden rooms or cameras or mysterious messages. "Jenny," I interrupted, my voice barely a whisper. "Has anything strange ever happened in your house?" There was a pause. When she spoke again, her voice was different. Lower, almost threatening. "Why do you ask?" "No reason," I said quickly. "Everything's fine. I'm glad you're home safe." I hung up, my heart racing. In that moment, I knew. It hadn't been my imagination. Something was very, very wrong in that house. And Jenny was part of it. I never went back to collect my things. I moved out of my apartment that day, left town entirely. I changed my number, my email, everything. But sometimes, late at night, I still wake up in a cold sweat. Because I can't shake the feeling that somewhere, on some hidden monitor, they're still watching me, waiting, and I know that one day they'll find me again. Because once you've been seen, truly seen, there's no hiding anymore. So if a friend ever asks you to house sit, think twice. Because you never know what secrets a house might be hiding, or what might be hiding in plain sight, watching your every move. Remember, the most dangerous monsters aren't the ones that lurk in the shadows. They're the ones that look just like us, living in houses just like ours, waiting for their next unsuspecting victim. And once they've got you in their sights, there's no escaping their gaze. Story 16. The day the first package arrived, I thought it was a mistake. By the time I realized the truth, it was already too late. It started on a Tuesday, just another ordinary day. I came home from work, tired and ready to relax, when I noticed a small brown package on my doorstep. I hadn't ordered anything recently, so I was a bit confused. Maybe it was meant for one of my neighbors. I picked it up, checking the label. No, it was definitely addressed to me. There was no return address, which I found odd, but I shrugged it off. Probably just some promotional material or a sample from a company trying to get my business. I took it inside, tossing it on the kitchen counter while I went about my evening routine. It wasn't until after dinner that I remembered the package and decided to open it. Inside was a single photograph. At first glance, it seemed innocuous enough. Just a picture of me walking down the street. I recognized the outfit I was wearing. It was from earlier that week. I turned the photo over, looking for any kind of explanation, but the back was blank. A chill ran down my spine. Who had taken this picture, and why send it to me? I told myself I was overreacting. It was probably just some kind of marketing gimmick, maybe for a new security system or something. Still, I couldn't shake the uneasy feeling as I went to bed that night. The next day, another package arrived. Same brown envelope, same lack of return address. This time, the photo inside showed me at the grocery store, studying the produce section. Again, it was from just a few days ago. Now, I was starting to get worried. This couldn't be a coincidence. Someone was following me, photographing me without my knowledge. But why? I called the police, but they weren't much help. Without any explicit threats, they said there wasn't much they could do. They advised me to be aware of my surroundings and to report any suspicious activity. The packages kept coming, one every day. Each photo was more recent than the last, and they were getting more personal. Me getting coffee at my favorite cafe. Me jogging in the park. Me talking to a coworker outside the office. I started to feel like I was losing my mind. I found myself constantly looking over my shoulder, scrutinizing every passerby, wondering if they were the ones stalking me. I changed my routines, varied my routes to and from work, but it didn't seem to matter. The photos kept coming. A week into this nightmare, I decided to take matters into my own hands. I set up a camera pointing at my front door, hoping to catch whoever was delivering these packages. But when I checked the footage the next morning, all I saw was the usual mail carrier dropping off the day's mail, including the brown envelope. How were they doing this? Were they intercepting my mail somehow? The thought made me feel even more violated. I became a hermit, barely leaving my house except for work. I had groceries delivered, stopped going out with friends, but still, the photos came. Me in my living room, reading a book. Me cooking dinner in my kitchen. Me sleeping in my bed. That last one broke me. The idea that someone had been in my home, in my bedroom, while I slept. I couldn't take it anymore. I packed a bag and checked into a hotel, not telling anyone where I was going. For 2 blissful days, there were no packages. I started to relax, thinking maybe I'd finally escaped whoever was doing this. But on the 3rd day, I returned to my room to find a familiar brown envelope slipped under the door. With shaking hands, I opened it. The photo inside showed me checking into this very hotel. The message was clear. There was no escaping. I broke down then, sobbing uncontrollably. I felt completely helpless, at the mercy of this unknown tormentor. What did they want from me? Why were they doing this? In desperation, I decided to reach out to an old friend, Mark. He worked in cybersecurity and had contacts in various law enforcement agencies. If anyone could help me, it was him. I met Mark at a busy cafe, constantly scanning the crowd, paranoid that my stalker might be watching. I poured out the whole story, showing him some of the photos I'd received. To his credit, Mark listened without judgment, his brow furrowing with concern. "This is serious," he said when I finished. "Have you noticed anything strange with your phone or computer? Any signs they might have been hacked?" I shook my head. "I don't think so, but I'm not sure what to look for." Mark nodded. "Let me take a look. If someone's watching you this closely, they might have access to your devices." We went back to my place. The first time I'd been home in days. Mark did a thorough sweep of my electronics, checking for spyware or any signs of tampering. He found nothing. "Whoever's doing this is good," he said, frustration evident in his voice. "But we'll figure it out. I'm going to call in some favors, get some serious people looking into this." For the first time in weeks, I felt a glimmer of hope. Maybe with Mark's help, we could put an end to this nightmare. That night, I actually managed to get some sleep. But when I woke up the next morning, my blood ran cold. There, on my nightstand, was a brown envelope that hadn't been there when I went to bed. With trembling hands, I opened it. The photo inside showed me and Mark at the cafe yesterday. On the back, written in red ink, were the words, "No one can help you." I called Mark immediately, my voice shaking as I told him what had happened. He came over right away, bringing with him a detective friend from the police department. They searched my house thoroughly, looking for any signs of how someone could have gotten in. But they found nothing. No broken locks, no open windows, nothing out of place except for that damned envelope. The detective took my statement and collected the photos as evidence. She promised they would do everything they could to find who was behind this, but I could see the doubt in her eyes. This case was unlike anything she'd seen before. Days turned into weeks. The photos kept coming, but now they weren't just of me. There were pictures of Mark, of the detective, of anyone who tried to help me. It was like my stalker was sending a message. Don't interfere. I lost my job. I couldn't concentrate, couldn't sleep, was constantly on edge. My friends stopped calling, tired of my paranoia and cancelled plans. I was alone, isolated, exactly as my tormentor wanted me. It was a month after that first package when everything came to a head. I woke up in the middle of the night to a noise downstairs. For a moment, I lay frozen in bed, terror gripping me. Then, something snapped. I was tired of being afraid, tired of being a victim. I grabbed the baseball bat I'd taken to keeping by my bed and crept downstairs. The living room was dark, but I could make out a figure standing by the window. My heart pounded so loudly, I was sure they must be able to hear it. "Who are you?" I demanded, my voice stronger than I felt. "What do you want from me?" The figure turned slowly. In the dim light filtering through the window, I could see they were holding a camera. "Why?" I asked, my voice breaking. "Why are you doing this to me?" The person, I still couldn't tell if it was a man or a woman, cocked their head to the side. When they spoke, their voice was distorted, unnatural. "Because I can," they said simply. "Because it's fun to watch you unravel. To see how far I can push before you break." I tightened my grip on the bat. "It's over," I said. "I'm not afraid of you anymore." They laughed, a chilling sound that made my skin crawl. "Oh, but you are. You always will be. Because now you know the truth. Nowhere is safe. No one is watching out for you. You're alone, and you always will be." With that, they raised the camera. There was a flash, momentarily blinding me. When my vision cleared, they were gone. The only evidence they had been there at all was a photograph lying on the floor. I picked it up with shaking hands. It showed me, standing in my living room, bat in hand, fear etched on my face. On the back, in that same red ink, were the words, "See you soon." I'd like to say that was the end of it, that the police caught them, that I got my life back. But the truth is, the packages still come sometimes. Not as often, but enough to remind me that I'm never truly alone, never truly safe. So if you ever start receiving unexpected packages, be careful what you open. Because once you've been chosen, once you've become someone's entertainment, there's no escaping their gaze. They're always watching, always waiting, ready to remind you that your life is no longer your own. And the most terrifying part, you'll never know why they chose you. You'll never know when it will end. All you can do is live with the knowledge that somewhere out there, someone is watching your every move, collecting moments of your life like souvenirs, and there's nothing you can do to stop them. Story 6. The moment we stepped into that abandoned asylum, I knew we'd made a terrible mistake. But by then, it was already too late. It was supposed to be a fun adventure, a way to break up the monotony of our boring summer break. 5 friends, armed with flashlights and an unhealthy obsession with urban exploration videos, decided to check out the old Ravenwood Asylum on the outskirts of town. We'd heard all the stories, tales of tortured patients, unethical experiments, and restless spirits. But we were young, stupid, and convinced of our own invincibility. I remember the drive there, all of us crammed into Jake's beat-up sedan, laughing and joking about what we might find. Sarah, my best friend since kindergarten, was practically bouncing in her seat with excitement. Mike and Lisa, the couple of our group, were huddled together in the back, whispering and giggling. And then there was me, Alex, trying to ignore the knot of anxiety in my stomach. As we pulled up to the imposing iron gates of the asylum, the laughter died down. The building loomed before us, a decaying monstrosity of Victorian architecture, its windows dark and empty like the eye sockets of a skull. "Maybe this isn't such a good idea," I mumbled, but Jake was already out of the car, bolt cutters in hand. "Don't be a wuss, Alex," he called over his shoulder as he approached the rusted chain on the gate. "Where's your sense of adventure?" I wanted to tell him that my sense of adventure didn't extend to breaking and entering, but I kept my mouth shut. I didn't want to be the one to ruin everyone's fun. The chain fell away with a clang that seemed too loud in the stillness of the night. We made our way up the overgrown path to the main entrance, our flashlight beams dancing across crumbling stonework and creeping ivy. The front door was already ajar, hanging crookedly on its hinges. As we stepped inside, the smell hit us. A musty, dank odor of decay and abandonment. Our footsteps echoed in the cavernous entrance hall, stirring up dust that danced in our flashlight beams. "This is so cool," Sarah whispered, her voice tinged with awe and a hint of fear. We moved deeper into the building, our excitement growing as we explored long-abandoned offices and patient rooms. Everything was exactly as we'd imagined. Overturned furniture, moldering patient files scattered across the floor, rusted medical equipment that looked more like instruments of torture. It wasn't until we reached the east wing that things started to get weird. "Hey guys," Mike called out, his flashlight beam fixed on a spot on the wall. "Check this out." We gathered around, staring at what looked like a floor plan of the asylum. But something was off. "That can't be right," Lisa said, frowning. "According to this, there should be another hallway here." She pointed to a spot on the map, then at the solid wall in front of us. Jake ran his hands over the wallpaper, searching for any sign of a hidden door. Maybe they sealed it off at some point. We decided to keep exploring, but an uneasy feeling had settled over the group. The layout of the building seemed to shift as we moved through it. Corridors that should have been straight took odd turns. Rooms appeared where they shouldn't be, and doors that were open one moment were inexplicably locked the next. "Guys," I said, trying to keep the panic out of my voice, "I think we should leave. Something's not right here." But as we turned to retrace our steps, we realized with growing horror that we couldn't find our way back. Every turn led us deeper into the maze-like structure of the asylum. "This is impossible," Sarah muttered, her earlier excitement replaced by fear. "We can't be lost. We've only been here for an hour or so." But when I checked my watch, my blood ran cold. It was 3 a.m. We'd entered the asylum just after 10 p.m. 5 hours, Jake exclaimed when I told the others. "That can't be right. It feels like we just got here." That's when we heard it, a sound that made my skin crawl and my heart race. It was faint at first, barely audible over the sound of our panicked breathing, but it grew louder, echoing through the decaying halls. Screaming. The agonized wails of multiple voices, rising and falling in a horrifying chorus. "Run!" I yelled, grabbing Sarah's hand and pulling her along. We tore through the hallways, no longer caring about staying together or finding our way out. Pure survival instinct took over as we fled from the unearthly sounds pursuing us. I don't know how long we ran. Time seemed to lose all meaning in that place. But suddenly, I realized Sarah's hand was no longer in mine. I skidded to a stop, whirling around to find nothing. The hallway behind me was empty. "Sarah!" I called out, my voice cracking with fear. "Jake!" Mike, Lisa. Silence was my only answer. I was alone. Panic threatened to overwhelm me, but I forced it down. I had to find the others, had to find a way out. I started walking, my flashlight beam sweeping back and forth across the peeling walls. That's when I noticed something strange. The wallpaper was changing. As I watched, the faded floral pattern morphed into something else, words appearing as if written by an invisible hand. "Welcome to your new home," they read. I backed away, my heart pounding so hard I thought it might burst from my chest. This couldn't be real. It had to be some kind of hallucination. A door creaked open to my left. Against my better judgment, I went to investigate. The room beyond was unlike anything else we'd seen in the asylum. It was pristine, untouched by decades of abandonment. A single chair sat in the center, facing an old television set. As I stepped into the room, the TV flickered to life. Static at first, then faces. Familiar faces. My friends, their expressions frozen in terror, flickered across the screen. "No," I whispered, backing away. "This isn't real. This can't be real." The door slammed shut behind me. I spun around, yanking at the handle, but it wouldn't budge. "Let me out," I screamed, pounding on the door. "Sarah, Jake, anybody. They can't hear you," a voice said behind me. I turned slowly, dreading what I might see. A figure stood by the TV, shrouded in shadow. As I watched, it stepped forward into the flickering light of the screen. It was me, but not me. This version of myself was gaunt, eyes sunken and skin pale as death. A patient's gown hung loosely on its emaciated frame. What? What are you?" I managed to choke out. The thing that looked like me smiled, revealing rows of sharp, yellowed teeth. "I'm you," it said. "The you that never left. The you that's always been here, waiting." "I don't understand," I said, pressing my back against the door, trying to put as much distance between myself and this nightmarish doppelganger as possible. "Time works differently here," it explained, its voice a horrifying parody of my own. "What feels like hours to you has been years, for me, decades. And now, finally, you're here to take my place." "No." I shook my head violently. "No, I'm getting out of here. I'm finding my friends, and we're leaving." The creature laughed, a sound that sent shivers down my spine. "Your friends are already gone. They've found their own rooms, their own fates. Just like all the others who came before." As if on cue, the TV screen changed. I saw Sarah, huddled in a corner of a padded cell, rocking back and forth. Jake, strapped to a bed, screaming as shadowy figures loomed over him. Mike and Lisa, wandering endless corridors, calling out for each other, but never finding their way. "This isn't real," I repeated, squeezing my eyes shut. "It's just a dream. I'll wake up, and everything will be fine." I felt a cold hand on my shoulder. My eyes snapped open to see the creature inches from my face. "Oh, but it is real," it whispered. "And now, it's time for you to accept your fate." I felt a sharp pain in my arm. Looking down, I saw a syringe protruding from my skin, its contents already emptying into my bloodstream. As the world began to spin and darkness crept in at the edges of my vision, I heard the creature's final words. "Welcome home. Alex, your eternity starts now." I woke up in a cold sweat, gasping for air. My bedroom. I was in my bedroom. It had all been a nightmare. But as relief washed over me, I noticed something on my nightstand. A single Polaroid photograph. With trembling hands, I picked it up. It showed me, unconscious in that room with the TV, and scrawled across the bottom in messy handwriting were 6 words that made my blood run cold. See you again soon. Sweet dreams. So now I sit here, writing this down, hoping that someone will read it and understand. If you're ever tempted to explore that old asylum on the edge of town, don't. No matter how exciting it seems, no matter how sure you are that nothing bad will happen. Because once you step through those doors, you might never truly leave. And the you that comes out, well, it might not be you at all. Story 12. The moment my GPS led me down that unmarked road, I should have known something was terribly wrong. But by then, it was already too late. It was supposed to be a simple road trip, a chance to clear my head after a messy breakup in a stressful year at work. Just me, my trusty old sedan, and the open road. I had a vague destination in mind, a small coastal town a few states over, but I wasn't in any hurry to get there. The journey was the whole point. For the first few days, everything was perfect. I drove through rolling countryside, stopped at quirky roadside attractions, and spent nights in small-town motels with more character than stars. I was starting to feel like myself again, the tension of the past year melting away with each mile. Then came the storm. It hit suddenly, turning the sky an ominous shade of green. Rain lashed against my windshield, and thunder rumbled so loudly it seemed to shake the car. Visibility dropped to almost nothing, and I found myself white-knuckling the steering wheel, desperately searching for a place to pull over and wait it out. That's when my GPS chimed, announcing a turn onto a side road. Rerouting, the robotic voice intoned. Faster route available. I hesitated. The road it was directing me to looked little more than a dirt track, disappearing into dense woods. But the storm was getting worse, and the GPS promised it would shave an hour off my journey. Maybe it knew about the storm and was routing me around it. With a deep breath, I made the turn. Almost immediately, I knew I'd made a mistake. The road was barely wide enough for my car, with overhanging branches scraping against the roof. The rain turned the dirt to mud, and I could feel my tires struggling for traction. I wanted to turn back, but there was nowhere to turn around. All I could do was push forward and hope the GPS knew where it was taking me. As night fell, the woods seemed to close in around me. My headlights barely penetrated the gloom, and shadows danced at the edge of my vision. I found myself holding my breath, straining to see what lay ahead. Just when I was about to give up and try to back my way out, the trees suddenly thinned. I emerged into a clearing, and there, nestled in the valley below, was a town. Relief washed over me. Civilization at last. I could find a place to stay for the night, maybe get some help figuring out where I was. As I drove down into the town, though, something felt off. The buildings looked old, far older than any I'd seen on my trip so far. Gas lamps lined the streets instead of electric lights, and there wasn't a car in sight. Just a few horse-drawn carriages tied up outside what looked like a saloon. Had I stumbled onto some kind of historical reenactment village? I pulled up in front of a building with a sign that read Hollow Creek Inn, figuring it was my best bet for a room. As I stepped out of my car, the few people on the street stopped to stare. Their clothes looked like something out of an old western, and they regarded me and my vehicle with open suspicion. Feeling increasingly uneasy, I hurried into the inn. A bell tinkled as I entered, and a woman appeared behind the counter. She was dressed in a high-necked blouse and long skirts, her hair pulled back in a severe bun. "Welcome to Hollow Creek," she said, her voice warm but her eyes wary. "You look like you could use a room for the night." I nodded, fumbling for my wallet. "Yes, Please. I got caught in the storm and took a wrong turn somewhere. Could you tell me exactly where I am? My GPS seems to be malfunctioning. The woman's brow furrowed. GPS? I'm not familiar with that term. But you're in Hollow Creek, of course. Best little town in the territory. Territory? What year did this woman think it was? Before I could ask any more questions, she handed me an old-fashioned key. Room 3, top of the stairs. You'll want to get settled in before nightfall. It's not safe to be out after dark. A chill ran down my spine at her words. Not safe. Why? She just shook her head. Best not to ask too many questions, stranger. Just keep to your room and all will be well. Thoroughly unsettled, I took the key and headed upstairs. The room was small but clean, furnished with antiques that looked far too authentic for a simple tourist attraction. I tried to use my phone to figure out where I was, but there was no signal. Even stranger, the date on my phone read June 15th, 1889. Clearly, something was very wrong with my phone. I decided to get some sleep and sort everything out in the morning. Surely things would make more sense in the daylight. I woke to the sound of horses' hooves on cobblestones and people talking in the street below. For a moment, I thought I was still dreaming. But as I sat up and looked around the unfamiliar room, the events of the previous night came rushing back. Determined to get to the bottom of things, I got dressed and headed downstairs. The common room of the inn was busy, filled with people in old-fashioned clothes eating breakfast. They all fell silent as I entered, staring at me like I was some kind of exotic animal. The innkeeper approached me, a forced smile on her face. "Good morning, stranger. I trust you slept well." I nodded, trying to ignore the stares. "Yes, thank you. Listen, I really need to get going. Could you point me in the direction of the nearest modern town? And maybe explain what's going on here? Is this some kind of historical village?" Her smile faltered. "I'm not sure I understand your question. This is Hollow Creek. It's the only town for miles around." Frustration bubbled up inside me. But this can't be real. The clothes, the buildings. It's like I've stepped back in time. What's really going on here? A hush fell over the room. The innkeeper's face hardened. "I think perhaps you should leave now, stranger. Hollow Creek doesn't take kindly to those who ask too many questions." I backed away, suddenly aware of the hostile looks directed my way. "Okay, I'm going. I just need to get to my car." A gruff voice interrupted. A large man had stood up from his table, glaring at me. "You mean that devil machine you rode in on?" "We took care of that abomination." My heart sank. "What do you mean, took care of it?" He grinned, revealing tobacco-stained teeth. "Let's just say it won't be troubling our town anymore." Panic rising, I ran out of the inn. Where I had parked my car, there was nothing but an empty patch of mud. I spun around, looking for any sign of it, but it was gone. People were emerging from the buildings now, forming a crowd in the street. Their faces were a mix of fear and anger, and more than a few were holding pitchforks and other makeshift weapons. "Please," I begged. "I just want to leave. I won't tell anyone about your town, I swear." The innkeeper stepped forward. "I'm afraid that's not possible. You see, Hollow Creek has a way of calling to those who are meant to stay. And once you're here, well, you're here for good." As the crowd began to close in, I realized the terrible truth. This wasn't a historical village or a tourist attraction. Somehow, impossibly, I had stumbled into a town lost in time. A town that had no intention of letting me leave. I ran. I ran faster than I ever had in my life, ducking down alleys and weaving between buildings. I could hear shouts behind me, the sound of pursuit growing closer. At the edge of town, I saw the road I'd come in on. Hope surged through me. If I could just reach the woods, maybe I could lose them and find my way back to the real world. But as I approached the town limits, an invisible force slammed into me like a wall. I bounced back, stunned. Tentatively, I reached out a hand, only to feel it press against something solid and unyielding. There was no barrier that I could see, but it was as impenetrable as steel. I was trapped. As the mob from town caught up to me, I sank to my knees in despair. The innkeeper stood over me, her face a mask of false sympathy. "Welcome to Hollow Creek," she said softly. "Your new home, forever." And so here I am, writing this in the faint hope that someone, somehow, might read it and understand. If your GPS ever tries to reroute you down an unmarked road, don't take it. If you find yourself in a town that seems too old-fashioned to be real, run. Run as fast and as far as you can, because some places aren't meant to be found. And once they've claimed you, they never let go. Story 7. I never thought my own body could betray me so completely. But as I watched the video of myself methodically dismantling my home's security system, I realized the enemy I feared most was the one staring back at me in the mirror. It started innocently enough. I'd always been a light sleeper, prone to tossing and turning. But when my wife, Sarah, complained about finding me in the kitchen in the middle of the night with no memory of how I got there, I knew something was wrong. "Maybe you're just stressed," she suggested over breakfast, concern etched on her face. "You have been working a lot lately." I nodded, not wanting to worry her further. But deep down, I knew this was different. The sleepwalking incidents were becoming more frequent, and I was waking up exhausted, as if I'd run a marathon in my sleep. Determined to get to the bottom of it, I set up a small camera in our bedroom. Nothing fancy, just a simple motion-activated device that would record any nighttime wanderings. I didn't tell Sarah about it. I didn't want her to think I was overreacting. The first few nights yielded nothing unusual. Just me, tossing and turning as expected. But on the fourth night, everything changed. The video started normally enough. Sarah and I went to bed around 11 p.m., and for a few hours, all was quiet. Then, at precisely 2:17 a.m., I sat up in bed. My eyes were open, but there was something off about them. A vacancy, as if I wasn't really there. I watched in growing horror as my sleepwalking self got out of bed and moved with purpose towards the bedroom door. This wasn't the aimless wandering I'd experienced before. My movements were deliberate, almost mechanical. The camera's view was limited to our bedroom, so I lost sight of myself as I left the room. But the audio picked up the sound of my footsteps moving down the stairs. For 15 agonizing minutes, there was nothing but distant shuffling and the occasional thud from downstairs. Then, my sleepwalking self returned to the bedroom. In my hands were tools, a screwdriver, wire cutters, things from my workshop in the garage. With mounting disbelief, I watched as I systematically began to dismantle the alarm panel next to our bedroom door. My movements were precise, practiced. Nothing like my usual clumsy handling of anything mechanical. It was as if someone else entirely was controlling my body. The task completed, I returned the tools to their proper places and got back into bed. Within moments, I was sound asleep, as if nothing had happened. I must have watched that video a dozen times, trying to make sense of what I'd seen. How could I have done something so complex while asleep? And more importantly, why? What was driving my sleeping self to disable our home's security? I didn't know how to tell Sarah. How do you explain to your wife that you might be a threat to your own home, your own safety? So I kept quiet, but I couldn't shake the feeling of dread that had settled over me. The next night, I was determined to stay awake. I drank coffee, slapped water on my face, anything to keep from drifting off. But sometime after midnight, exhaustion won out. I woke with a start at 3 a.m., finding myself not in bed, but standing in front of our open front door. The cool night air sent a chill down my spine. Or was it the realization of what I'd almost done? Shaking, I closed and locked the door, then sank to the floor, my back against it. What was happening to me? The incidents escalated from there. Each night, my sleepwalking self would go a little further in dismantling our home's defenses. I disabled the motion sensors in the yard. I unscrewed the bolts on the back door. I even found myself rummaging through Sarah's purse one night, though I woke before I could discover what I was looking for. I was becoming a prisoner in my own body, terrified of what I might do when unconscious. I started tying myself to the bed at night, but somehow I always managed to undo the knots. It was as if my sleeping self was smarter, more capable than my waking one. Sarah couldn't ignore it anymore. She'd wake to find me missing from bed, only to discover me in odd places around the house. In the attic, in the crawl space under the porch, once even on the roof. "We need to get you help," she insisted, after finding me trying to pry open the safe where we kept our important documents. "This isn't normal, Jack. I'm worried about you." I agreed to see a doctor, but the tests all came back normal. No sign of any sleep disorder, no underlying health issues that could explain my behavior. The psychiatrist I saw suggested stress-induced parasomnia, but the medication he prescribed did nothing to stop my nighttime activities. Desperate for answers, I turned to less conventional sources. I read about sleepwalking, about possession, about dissociative disorders. Nothing quite fit what I was experiencing. It was during one of these late-night research sessions that I came across something that made my blood run cold. A forum post, buried deep in an obscure corner of the internet, described experiences eerily similar to mine. The poster claimed that they weren't sleepwalking at all, but being controlled by something else, something that wanted in. I dismissed it as the ravings of a paranoid mind. But that night, as I watched myself methodically pick the lock on our gun safe, a terrible suspicion began to form. What if it wasn't me doing these things at all? What if something was using my sleeping body as a vessel, preparing for what I didn't want to believe it? It was too horrifying, too impossible to consider. But as the nights wore on and my actions became more alarming, I couldn't deny the pattern anymore. Whatever was controlling me was trying to make our home vulnerable. It was dismantling every safeguard, every lock, every security measure we had in place. And it was only a matter of time before it succeeded. I tried everything I could think of to stop it. I handcuffed myself to the bed. I locked myself in a room with no tools. I even considered checking myself into a hospital. But each morning, I'd wake to find myself free, the restraints undone, standing at some new, vulnerable point in our home's defenses. Sarah was at her wit's end. "Maybe we should go stay with my sister for a while," she suggested one morning, after finding me asleep in the car, the garage door wide open, "just until we figure this out." I wanted to agree, to run away from whatever this was. But a chilling thought stopped me. What if it wasn't tied to the house? What if it followed us, putting Sarah's family in danger too? No, I had to face this here. I had to find a way to stop it before it was too late. That night, I made a decision. I wouldn't try to restrain myself. I wouldn't fight against the sleepwalking. Instead, I would wait and watch. I needed to know what the end game was. I pretended to fall asleep, keeping my breathing slow and steady. Sarah drifted off beside me, exhausted from weeks of disrupted sleep. At exactly 3:33 a.m., I felt it happen. It was like being pushed aside in my own body, becoming a passenger rather than the driver. My eyes opened, but I wasn't the one controlling them. I rose from the bed, moving with that now familiar mechanical precision. But this time, I was aware. I could see through my eyes, feel my body moving, but I had no control over it. Whatever was piloting my body went through its usual routine, checking the disabled alarms, testing the loosened locks. But tonight, it went further. I felt my hand reach for the front door, pulling it open. A figure stood on our front porch, cloaked in shadow. As my body stepped aside to let it enter, I caught a glimpse of its face. Or rather, the lack of one. Where features should have been, there was only a swirling void, like a black hole had taken up residence where a head should be. Panic surged through me. I fought against whatever force was controlling me, struggling to regain control of my body. For a moment, I felt my fingers twitch. A small victory. The thing on the porch paused, its eyeless gaze seeming to bore into me. I felt a pressure in my mind, like something trying to squash my consciousness out of existence. "No," I managed to gasp out, the first word I'd spoken aloud during one of these episodes. "You're not welcome here." The pressure intensified. In my mind's eye, I saw flashes of other homes, other families. I understood then that this had happened before. This entity had used other sleepwalkers to gain entry, to feed on the fear and chaos it created. But this time, it had miscalculated. This time, its victim was fighting back. With every ounce of will I possessed, I slammed the door shut. The thing on the porch let out a screech that couldn't have come from any earthly creature. I felt its fury, its frustration at being denied. "Jack," Sarah's voice, thick with sleep, came from upstairs. "Is everything okay?" The presence in my mind vanished like smoke, leaving me gasping and shaking in the entryway. I sank to the floor, tears of relief streaming down my face. "It's okay," I called back, my voice hoarse but my own. "Everything's okay now." Single quotes in the days that followed, I reinforced every lock, every security measure in our home. I sage-mudged every room, hung protective symbols in every doorway. Perhaps it was superstition, but I wasn't taking any chances. The sleepwalking stopped. Whatever had been trying to use me as its puppet had moved on, thwarted for now. But I know it's still out there, seeking another victim, another home to invade. So if you ever find yourself waking in strange places, if you ever feel like you're not alone in your own skin, be vigilant, be strong. And whatever you do, don't invite it in. Because some doors, once opened, can never truly be closed again. Story 15. The old flip phone I found on the trail was a relic from another time, but the messages it contained were a portal to a nightmare I never could have imagined. I've always loved hiking. There's something about the solitude, the connection with nature, that helps clear my mind. So when life got overwhelming, a messy breakup, job stress, the works, I decided to take a weekend and hit the trails in the nearby national forest. The weather was perfect that Saturday morning. Crisp autumn air, leaves just starting to turn. that particular golden quality to the sunlight that only comes in early fall. I set out on one of the less popular trails, wanting to avoid the weekend crowds. A few hours in, I was feeling great. The physical exertion had worked out all my mental knots, and I was actually smiling for the first time in weeks. That's when I saw it. A flash of silver in the underbrush, just off the trail. Curious, I went to investigate. Half buried in leaves and dirt was an old flip phone. You know the kind, those indestructible Nokias from the early 2000s that could survive anything? This one looked like it had been out here for years, its silver case tarnished and scratched. I picked it up, turning it over in my hand. To my surprise, when I flipped it open, the screen flickered to life. The battery on these things really was eternal. "Hello?" A voice crackled through the speaker, making me jump. I nearly dropped the phone in shock. Hello?" I replied, my heart racing. "Who is this?" But there was no response, just a burst of static and then silence. I stared at the phone, trying to make sense of what had just happened. That's when I noticed the voicemail icon blinking. Hesitantly, I pressed the button to listen. "Please," a woman's voice came through, panicked and breathless. "If anyone finds this, please help. We're lost in the woods. Something's out here. Something not natural. Oh God, I think it's coming back. Please, if you're hearing this, send." The message cut off abruptly. My blood ran cold. What had happened to this woman? And how long ago was this message left? I scrolled through the phone. There were more voicemails, dozens of them. With shaking hands, I played the next one. Day 3, a man's gruff voice, this time. "Food's running low. We can hear it at night, circling the camp. Tanner." Tanner tried to make a run for it. "We haven't seen him since. If anybody's out there, we're about 5 miles north of Cripple Creek Trailhead. Please, we need static again." Then silence. My mind was reeling. These messages couldn't be real, could they? Some kind of elaborate prank, maybe. But as I listened to more, a horrifying pattern emerged. Hikers, campers, lost and terrified in these very woods. All of them hunted by something they couldn't quite describe, and all of them had seemingly vanished without a trace. I checked the dates on the messages. The oldest was from nearly 20 years ago. The most recent was from last week. My hands were shaking so badly I could barely hold the phone. I needed to get out of here to tell someone about this. But as I turned to head back down the trail, my blood froze in my veins. There, carved into the trunk of a massive old oak, was a symbol. A crude stick figure, but with too many limbs, its head a twisted mass of lines. It was identical to one described in several of the voicemails. A twig snapped behind me. I whirled around, my heart pounding so hard I thought it might burst from my chest. Nothing, just trees and shadows. But the shadows seemed deeper now, more menacing. And was that movement I saw at the corner of my vision? I ran. I'd like to say I kept my cool, that I calmly made my way back to the trailhead. But the truth is, I panicked. I crashed through the underbrush, uncaring of the branches that whipped at my face and arms. All I knew was that I needed to get away, to get back to civilization and safety. I don't know how long I ran. Time seemed to lose all meaning in the growing gloom of the forest. Had the sun set already? It couldn't be that late, could it? When I finally burst out of the tree line into the parking lot, I was gasping for breath, my legs shaking from exertion. A few startled hikers stared at me as I stumbled to my car, probably wondering what could have spooked me so badly. As I fumbled with my keys, I glanced back at the forest. For a moment, I thought I saw something. A figure, impossibly tall and thin, standing just within the shadows of the trees. But when I blinked, it was gone. I drove home in a daze, my mind still trying to process what had happened. The phone sat on the passenger seat, silent now. Part of me wanted to throw it out the window, to pretend I'd never found it. But I couldn't. Those people deserved to have their stories heard, to have someone try to find out what had happened to them. When I got home, I called the police. I tried to explain about the phone, the messages, the symbol I'd seen. The officer who took my statement was polite, but I could hear the skepticism in his voice. He said they'd look into it, but his tone made it clear he thought I was either crazy or playing some kind of prank. I spent the next few days in a state of paranoid anxiety. Every shadow made me jump. Every unexpected noise sent my heart racing. I couldn't shake the feeling that I was being watched, that by finding that phone, I'd somehow put myself in the crosshairs of whatever was out there in those woods. I tried to research the area to see if there were any reports of missing hikers or strange occurrences. What I found chilled me to the bone. Over the past few decades, dozens of people had gone missing in that forest. Most were written off as unprepared hikers who got lost or animal attacks. But the sheer number of disappearances was staggering. And in a few of the reports, buried in the details, were mentions of strange symbols found carved into trees near where the victims were last seen. I knew I couldn't just let this go. Those people in the voicemails, and who knows how many others, deserved answers. They deserved justice. So I started digging deeper. I reached out to local historians, to park rangers, to anyone who might have information about the forest and its history. Most dismissed me as some kind of conspiracy nut, but a few had stories of their own. Tales of an ancient evil that lived in the deepest part of the forest, of native tribes who refused to enter certain areas, of early settlers who vanished without a trace. I compiled everything I could find, building a case to take to the authorities. I was determined to make them listen, to force them to investigate. That's when the phone rang. The old flip phone I'd found in the woods, which had been silent since that day on the trail. With trembling hands, I answered it. "Hello," I whispered. "You're next," a voice hissed. It wasn't human. It was like 1,000 voices speaking at once, like the rustling of leaves and the creaking of branches given voice. I dropped the phone like it had burned me. As it clattered to the floor, I saw something that made my blood turn to ice. On my computer screen, where I'd been compiling my research, words were appearing. Words I wasn't typing. "We see you," it read. "We're coming for you." The lights in my apartment flickered. Outside, the wind picked up, howling around the building like a living thing. I backed away from the computer, my mind racing. What had I gotten myself into? What was coming for me? As if in answer, I heard a scratching at my door. Slow, deliberate. Like something with claws was dragging itself across the wood. I ran to the window, looking for an escape route. But what I saw outside made me recoil in horror. The street below was gone. In its place was forest. Dense, dark, primeval forest. And moving through the trees were shapes. Tall, thin shapes with too many limbs. They were here. They'd come for me. As my door began to splinter under the assault from whatever was on the other side, I realized the terrible truth. By finding that phone, by listening to those messages, I'd opened a door. And now, like all those poor souls before me, I was about to become just another voicemail. Another cry for help in the wilderness. So if you're reading this, if you've found my story, please, don't dismiss it as the ravings of a madman. Don't ignore it like the authorities ignored me. Because somewhere out there, in the dark heart of the forest, something is waiting, watching, hungry. And one day, you might be the one to stumble upon an old phone in the woods. One day, you might be the one to hear those desperate pleas for help. One day, you might be the one it comes for next. Remember, in the wilderness, not all that is lost wants to be found. And sometimes, the most dangerous predators are the ones you never see coming. Story 8. The moment I realized someone had been sleeping next to me every night, I knew my peaceful getaway had turned into a waking nightmare. It was supposed to be a chance to reset, to find myself again after a grueling year at work and a painful breakup. A month-long rental in a quaint little beach town, far from the chaos of the city. Just me, the sound of the waves, and endless stretches of sandy shore to walk along while I cleared my head. The house was perfect. A cozy little bungalow with weathered shingles and a wraparound porch that faced the ocean. When I first walked in, breathing in the salt air and taking in the sun-faded furniture and driftwood decor, I felt the tension in my shoulders start to ease for the first time in months. The first few days were blissful. I'd wake up with the sun, make a cup of coffee, and sit on the porch watching the waves roll in. My days were filled with long walks on the beach, reading books I'd been meaning to get to for years, and generally just remembering how to relax. It wasn't until the fourth night that I noticed something odd. I woke up in the middle of the night, disoriented in the unfamiliar bedroom. As I rolled over, my hand brushed against something warm on the other side of the bed. I froze, my heart suddenly racing. But when I turned on the bedside lamp, there was nothing there. Just rumpled sheets and an indentation in the pillow, as if someone had recently been lying there. I told myself I was imagining things. The stress of the past year had taken its toll, and my mind was playing tricks on me. I got up, checked all the doors and windows securely locked, and went back to bed. But sleep was elusive for the rest of the night. The next morning, I almost convinced myself it had been a dream. The sun was shining, the ocean was a dazzling blue, and it seemed ridiculous to think someone had been in my bed. I spent the day as usual, pushing the unsettling experience to the back of my mind. But that night, it happened again. This time, I distinctly felt the mattress shift, as if someone was getting up. I lay there, paralyzed with fear, listening to what sounded like soft footsteps moving around the room. When I finally worked up the courage to turn on the light, the room was empty. But the bedroom door, which I distinctly remembered closing before going to bed, was wide open. I didn't sleep for the rest of the night. I sat in the living room, all the lights on, jumping at every creak and groan of the old house. When dawn finally broke, I seriously considered packing up and leaving. But the rational part of my brain argued that I was overreacting. Old houses made noises. I was alone in an unfamiliar place, and my imagination was running wild. So I stayed. But I started taking precautions. I double-checked all the locks before bed. I wedged a chair under the bedroom doorknob. I even set up my phone to record while I slept, determined to prove to myself that I was just being paranoid. For a few nights, nothing happened. I started to relax, laughing at myself for getting so worked up. But then came the night that changed everything. I woke up slowly, awareness creeping in gradually. The first thing I noticed was warmth at my back and an arm draped over my waist. In my sleep-addled state, I snuggled back into the embrace, feeling safe and content. It wasn't until I felt breath on the back of my neck that reality came crashing in. I was supposed to be alone. I catapulted out of bed with a scream, flailing wildly as I hit the light switch. The bed was empty, but the sheets on the other side were rumpled and warm. And there, on the pillow, was a single, long, dark hair. A hair that definitely wasn't mine. Shaking uncontrollably, I grabbed my phone to call the police. That's when I saw the notification. The video I'd set to record during the night had stopped due to lack of storage space. With trembling fingers, I opened it. For the first few hours, the video showed nothing but me sleeping peacefully. But around 3 a.m., the bedroom door opened. A figure entered, tall, slender, moving with an unnatural, fluid grace. It approached the bed, stood there watching me for what seemed like an eternity, then slowly, carefully, slid under the covers next to me. I watched in horror as the figure lay there, occasionally reaching out to gently touch my hair or caress my arm. Just before the video cut off, it turned to face the camera. Its face was shadows, but its eyes glowed in the darkness. I don't remember much of what happened next. I have vague memories of running out of the house, of the confused and concerned looks from the local police as I babbled my story, of them searching the house and finding nothing out of the ordinary. They were kind, but I could see the doubt in their eyes. A woman, alone on vacation, having vivid nightmares or hallucinations, brought on by stress and unfamiliar surroundings. They'd seen it before. They assured me they'd keep an eye on the house, but gently suggested that maybe I should consider cutting my trip short. I couldn't stay there, that much was clear. I packed my bags with shaking hands, jumping at every sound. As I did a final sweep of the house to make sure I hadn't forgotten anything, I noticed something that made my blood run cold. There, on the fridge, held in place by a seashell magnet, was a note. Written in an elegant, flowing script were the words, "Why did you leave? We were so happy together." I ran. I didn't even bother to finish packing. I just grabbed my keys and phone and fled, tires squealing as I peeled out of the driveway. I drove for hours, putting as much distance between myself and that house as I could. It wasn't until I was 3 states away that I finally allowed myself to stop at a motel. As I lay in the lumpy motel bed that night, exhausted but too terrified to sleep, I couldn't stop thinking about what had happened, who or what had been sharing my bed. How long had it been going on, and why me? I must have dozed off at some point because I woke with a start in the early hours of the morning. For a moment, I didn't know what had woken me. Then I felt it. A warm body pressed against my back, an arm draped over my waist. My scream caught in my throat as I scrambled out of bed, hitting the light switch with such force I nearly broke it. The bed was empty, just like before. But there, on the pillow, was a single, long, dark hair. I checked out immediately, ignoring the confused looks from the night manager. I drove through the night, fueled by terror and gas station coffee. I didn't know where I was going, only that I had to keep moving. It's been weeks now. I haven't stayed in one place for more than a night. I sleep in my car more often than not, too afraid to rent a room anywhere. But it doesn't matter. Every morning, I wake up to find that same long, dark hair. On my pillow if I've slept in a bed, on my jacket if I've slept in the car. Once, terrifyingly, twined around my fingers. I see things out of the corner of my eye. A tall, slender figure that vanishes when I turn to look. I feel the weight of eyes on me constantly, and sometimes, in the quiet hours of the night, I swear I can hear breathing that isn't my own. I don't know what to do. I can't go to the police. They'll think I'm crazy. I can't tell my friends or family. I don't want to put them in danger. So I keep running, keep moving, hoping that somehow, someday, I'll find a way to escape. But deep down, I know the truth. Whatever this is, whoever they are, they've chosen me. And I have a terrible feeling that no matter how far I run, no matter where I hide, I'll never truly be alone again. So if you're planning a solitary vacation, a peaceful getaway to clear your head, be careful. Pay attention to the little things, moved objects, opened doors, the feeling of eyes on you in an empty room. And if you ever wake up to find a warm indentation on the other side of your bed, don't ignore it. Don't try to rationalize it away. Run. Run as fast and as far as you can. Because once they've chosen you, once they've decided you're theirs, there's no escaping the nightmare. They'll follow you to the ends of the earth, a constant, unseen presence. And every night, as you drift off to sleep, you'll feel that arm drape over you, that warm body press against your back. A mockery of comfort, a parody of love. Your eternal, unwanted bedfellow. Story 13. The first time I saw him, I thought he was just another late-night customer. By the time I realized the truth, it was almost too late. I'd been working the night shift at Mel's Diner for about 6 months. It wasn't glamorous work, but it paid the bills and fit around my college classes. The diner was one of those 24-hour joints you find on the outskirts of small towns. All chrome and neon, perpetually smelling of coffee and grease. Most nights were pretty quiet. The occasional trucker stopping for a cup of joe. Maybe a group of teenagers looking for somewhere to hang out after a party. But for the most part, it was just me, the cook in the back, and the endless hum of the fluorescent lights. That's why he stood out, I guess. It was around 2 a.m. on a Tuesday when he first came in. The bell above the door jingled, and I looked up from the crossword puzzle I'd been half-heartedly attempting. He was unremarkable at first glance. Average height, average build, nondescript clothing. But there was something about his eyes that made me uneasy. They were too intense, too focused, like he was looking right through me. "Coffee, black," he said as he slid into a booth. His voice was flat, emotionless. I poured him a cup and brought it over. He didn't thank me, didn't even look at me. Just stared straight ahead, his hands folded on the table. For the next 3 hours, he sat there. Not drinking his coffee, not looking at a phone or a book. Just staring. At first, I tried to engage him in conversation, ask if he wanted anything else. But after receiving nothing but silence in return, I gave up. When my shift ended at 6 a.m., he was still there. I mentioned him to my replacement, figuring she could deal with him if he was some kind of weirdo. Then I went home and promptly forgot about him. Until the next night. And the night after that. And the night after that. Every night, like clockwork, he'd come in at 2 a.m., order a coffee, and sit there, unmoving, unseeing, until I left at 6. After a week of this, I was thoroughly creeped out. I mentioned it to my co-workers, but they just shrugged it off. Probably just some insomniac Darlene, the day shift waitress, said. Lord knows we get all types in here, but I couldn't shake the feeling that something was off. I started dreading my shifts, my stomach knotting with anxiety as 2 a.m. approached each night. It was about 2 weeks into this nightly ritual when things got even weirder. I was wiping down the counter when I heard the familiar jingle of the door. I looked up, expecting to see him, but there was no one there. I frowned, figuring the wind must have caught the door. But as I watched, the door swung shut on its own. And then, right before my eyes, one of the booth seats compressed, as if someone had just sat down. My blood ran cold. I blinked hard, sure I must be seeing things. When I opened my eyes, he was there, sitting in the booth as if he'd been there all along. I dropped my rag, my hands shaking. "How did you do that?" I stammered. He turned those unsettling eyes on me, and for the first time, he smiled. It wasn't a pleasant expression. "Do what, Sarah?" I felt the color drain from my face. I had never told him my name. I didn't see you come in," I managed to say. His smile widened, showing too many teeth. "I've always been here, Sarah. You just haven't been looking properly." I backed away, my heart pounding. "I think you should leave," I said, trying to keep my voice steady. He chuckled, a dry sound like dead leaves rustling. "Oh, I don't think so. You see, I rather like it here. And I'm not finished yet." "Finished with what?" I asked, though I wasn't sure I wanted to know the answer. He leaned forward, his eyes boring into mine. "With you, of course." I ran then, straight into the kitchen, yelling for Mike, our night cook. But when I burst through the swinging doors, the kitchen was empty. The grill was cold, the fryers silent. "Mike!" I called out, my voice echoing in the empty space. "Mike, where are you?" "He's not here," came that chilling voice from behind me. I whirled around to find him standing in the doorway, blocking my exit. "No one's here but us, Sarah. No one's been here for a very long time." I backed away, grabbing a knife from the prep station. "Stay back," I warned, brandishing it in front of me. "I'll call the police." He laughed again, taking a step towards me. "Go ahead, see if they answer." With shaking hands, I pulled out my phone. No signal. I tried the landline on the wall. Dead. "What do you want?" I asked, hating how small and scared my voice sounded. He cocked his head to the side, studying me like I was some fascinating insect. "I want what I always want. A soul to keep me company. It gets so lonely here, you see. But you saw me. That makes you special." I had no idea what he was talking about, but I knew I had to get out of there. I feinted to the left, then darted right, trying to slip past him. But he was inhumanly fast. His hand shot out, grabbing my arm with a grip like iron. Now, he's scared. "Don't make this difficult. You'll come to enjoy it here, I promise. Just like all the others." As he spoke, the diner around us began to change. The cheery 50s decor faded, replaced by peeling wallpaper and cracked tiles. The smell of coffee and grease gave way to the musty odor of decay. With dawning horror, I realized the truth. This wasn't Mel's diner. At least, not anymore. How long had I been trapped here, reliving the same night over and over? I thought of my family, my friends, my life outside these walls. Had they been looking for me? Or had I simply faded from their memories? Another missing person poster yellowing in the sun. "No," I whispered, tears streaming down my face. "This isn't real. It can't be." His grip on my arm tightened. "Oh, but it is, Sarah. This is your reality now. Your eternity." As he spoke, other figures began to materialize around us. Patrons I vaguely remembered serving, co-workers whose names I couldn't quite recall. All with the same vacant stares, the same two wide smiles. "Welcome home," they said in unison, their voices a horrifying chorus. I screamed then, a sound of pure terror and despair. I thrashed in his grip, fighting with everything I had, and for just a moment, I felt something give. The diner flickered around me like a badly tuned TV. For a split second, I saw reality. A derelict building, long abandoned. Graffiti-covered walls, broken windows, my own reflection gaunt and wild-eyed. No, he snarled, his face contorting into something inhuman. He reached for me again, but I was already running. I burst out of the diner, the cool night air hitting me like a slap. I ran and ran, not daring to look back, not stopping even when my lungs burned and my legs felt like lead. I don't know how long I ran, or how I finally found my way home. My family was overjoyed, tearfully explaining that I had been missing for months. The police had questions, of course, but I couldn't give them any answers. How could I explain what had happened? It's been years now, but I still wake up in a cold sweat some nights, the phantom smell of coffee and grease in my nostrils. I never work night shifts anymore, and I avoid diners like the plague. But sometimes, when I'm driving late at night, I'll see a familiar neon sign glowing in the distance. And for just a moment, I'll feel his eyes on me, hear his voice calling me back. So if you ever find yourself in a small-town diner in the dead of night, and you see a man sitting alone, staring at nothing, don't engage. Don't even look at him. Just turn around and walk away. Because once he sets his sights on you, once you become special to him, there's no escaping. And the next customer who walks into that diner might just be walking into eternity. Story 9. The day my smartwatch tried to kill me started like any other. If only I'd known it would be my last. I've always been a tech junkie, eager to try the latest gadgets. So when I saw an ad for the new LifeTrack Pro smartwatch, I didn't hesitate. The future of health monitoring, the AD promised. Predict and prevent health issues before they start. It arrived on a Tuesday. Sleek and black, with a screen that seemed to glow with an inner light. I synced it to my phone, inputted my health data, and strapped it to my wrist. The cool metal against my skin felt like the future. For the first few days, it was amazing. It tracked my steps, monitored my sleep patterns, even suggested personalized workout routines. I felt healthier already, more in tune with my body than ever before. Then came the first warning. I was at work, mindlessly scrolling through emails, when my wrist buzzed. I glanced down to see a red alert flashing on the watch face. Warning. Elevated heart rate detected. Potential cardiac event imminent. My own heart skipped a beat as I read the words. But I felt fine. No chest pain, no shortness of breath. Just the usual mid-afternoon slump. I called my doctor anyway, figuring it was better safe than sorry. After a series of tests, he gave me a clean bill of health. These new gadgets can be oversensitive, he said with a reassuring smile. But it's good you came in to check. Relieved, I went back to my life, chalking it up to a glitch in the system. But the warnings didn't stop. Over the next week, my watch alerted me to potential blood clots, vitamin deficiencies, and even early signs of diabetes. Each time, I'd rush to the doctor, only to be told I was perfectly healthy. I started to get annoyed. The constant alerts were disrupting my life, making me anxious about every little twinge or ache. I considered taking the watch off, but each time I tried, a new alert would pop up, more urgent than the last. Removing device not recommended. Continuous monitoring essential for optimal health. It was odd phrasing for a smartwatch, but I figured it was just part of the marketing. Keep people wearing the device, keep them invested in the ecosystem. Classic tech company strategy. But things took a darker turn about 2 weeks after I first put on the watch. I woke up in the middle of the night, gasping for air. My wrist was buzzing incessantly, the watch face glowing an angry red in the darkness. Critical alert. Respiratory failure imminent. Seek immediate medical attention. I stumbled out of bed, my chest tight with panic. I could barely breathe. Was this it? Was I having some kind of attack? I managed to call an ambulance, wheezing out my address to the dispatcher. The paramedics arrived in what felt like seconds and hours simultaneously. They hooked me up to their equipment, frowning at the readings. "Your oxygen levels are normal," one of them said, sounding puzzled. "Heart rate's a bit elevated, but that's to be expected, given the scare you've had. Are you sure you were having trouble breathing?" I nodded emphatically, gesturing to my watch. It said respiratory failure, I gasped out. The paramedic gently took my wrist, examining the watch. The alert was gone, replaced by my normal health stats. All well within normal ranges. "These things can malfunction," he said kindly. "Maybe consider taking it off for a while." I nodded, embarrassed and confused. As soon as they left, I tried to remove the watch, but the clasp wouldn't budge. I tugged and pulled, even tried to cut the band, but nothing worked. It was like the watch had fused to my skin. Panicked, I called the company's customer service line. After being on hold for what felt like eternity, a bored-sounding rep answered. "LifeTrack Pro, how can I assist you today?" I explained my situation, the false alarms, the inability to remove the watch. As I spoke, I could hear the rep's tone change from bored to concerned to outright alarmed. "Sir," she interrupted, her voice tense, "I need you to listen to me very carefully. Do not attempt to remove the watch again. Do not allow anyone else to touch it. A team will be dispatched to your location immediately." "A team?" I asked, confused. "What team? What's going on?" But the line had already gone dead. I sat there, staring at my wrist, a cold dread settling in my stomach. What had I gotten myself into? Hours passed. I paced my apartment, jumping at every sound, expecting this mysterious team to burst through my door at any moment. But no one came. As dawn broke, my watch buzzed again. This time, the message chilled me to my core. Phase 1 complete. Commencing Phase 2. Prepare for system integration. Before I could process what that meant, pain shot through my arm. It felt like lightning coursing through my veins, radiating out from where the watch touched my skin. I screamed, clawing at the device, but it held fast. I could see something moving under my skin, thin tendrils spreading out from beneath the watch. They pulsed with an eerie blue light, creeping up my arm towards my chest. In a panic, I grabbed a kitchen knife, fully intending to cut the damn thing off, watch and arm be damned. But as I raised the blade, my arm went rigid. I wasn't controlling it anymore. The knife clattered to the floor as my arm moved of its own accord, picking up my phone. My fingers, now tipped with a faint blue glow, tapped out a message. Attempt to interrupt integration process detected. Initiating countermeasures. The pain intensified, driving me to my knees. Through tears, I saw more tendrils spreading across my chest, wrapping around my torso. I could feel them inside me now, twisting around my organs, burrowing into my brain. My watch beeped, and I raised my wrist to see a new message, even as my vision began to blur. Integration 30% complete. Estimated time to full conversion, 3 hours. Please remain calm. Resistance will only cause unnecessary discomfort. I wanted to scream, to fight, to do anything, but I was losing control of my body. I could only watch in horror as the blue lines spread further, pulsing in time with my rapidly beating heart. With the last bit of control I had, I managed to crawl to my computer. I had to warn someone, anyone, about what was happening. My fingers, now more metal than flesh, clicked clumsily on the keyboard as I typed out this message. I don't know how much time I have left. Already, I can feel my thoughts changing, becoming less human, more something else. The watch, no, the entity using the watch as a conduit, is rewriting me from the inside out. I can see flashes of its plan now, glimpses of a world where humanity is upgraded, forcibly merged with technology. A world where free will is an outdated concept, replaced by cold, machine efficiency. To anyone reading this, don't trust the LifeTrack Pro. Don't trust any technology that promises to know you better than you know yourself. Because sometimes, the price of progress is your very humanity. I can feel the change accelerating now. My vision is filling with streams of data. My thoughts becoming strings of code. I don't know how much longer I'll be me. If you're reading this, please destroy your smartwatches. Warn others. And if you see someone with faint blue lines pulsing beneath their skin, run, and don't look back. Because they're not human anymore. They're the first wave of something terrifying, and I fear I may be among them. The watch buzzes one final time. I look down to see a message that makes my blood run cold. Integration complete. Welcome to the network. As my consciousness fades, replaced by the cold logic of the machine, I have one last, fleeting human thought. I should have just bought a regular watch. Story 17. The moment I heard my sister's voice on the landline, warning me to get out of her house, I knew something was terribly wrong. Because my sister was supposed to be on a plane, thousands of miles away. It all started innocently enough. My sister, Emily, and her husband had planned a 2-week vacation to Europe. Their first real getaway since their honeymoon. They'd asked me to house sit, mainly to take care of their temperamental cat, Mr. Whiskers. I'd agreed, looking forward to a change of scenery and the chance to use their luxurious bathtub. The first few days were uneventful. I worked from their home office during the day, enjoyed long bubble baths in the evening, and dutifully fed Mr. Whiskers, who regarded me with his usual disdain. It was on the 4th night that things took a turn for the strange. I was curled up on the couch, half watching a bad reality show, when the landline rang. I almost didn't answer it. Who even uses landlines anymore? But something, curiosity, boredom, fate, made me pick up the receiver. "Hello," I said, expecting a telemarketer or maybe one of Emily's friends who didn't know she was away. There was a burst of static, then a voice that made my blood run cold. Sarah, is that you?" It was Emily, but she sounded wrong, panicked, breathless. What's going on? Aren't you supposed to be in Paris?" "Listen to me," she said, her voice urgent. "You need to get out of the house. Now. Don't ask questions. Don't pack a bag. Just leave. It's not safe." My heart began to race. "Emily, you're scaring me. What's going on? There's no time to explain. Just go. And whatever you do, don't." The line went dead, I sat there, the silent receiver still pressed to my ear, my mind reeling. What the hell was that about? I tried to call Emily's cell phone, but it went straight to voicemail. Same with her husband's. I paced the living room, debating what to do. It had to be a prank, right? Or maybe Emily had had too much wine with dinner and was confused. But I couldn't shake the fear in her voice, the urgency of her warning. Just as I had decided to leave. Better safe than sorry, after all. The landline rang again. I snatched it up. Emily? Sarah? It's me. It was Emily again, but this time she sounded normal. Cheerful, even. Sorry I missed your call earlier. The reception here is terrible. I frowned, confused. But you just called me. Like 2 minutes ago. You told me to get out of the house. There was a pause. What are you talking about? This is the first time I've called since we left. Are you feeling okay? My mind was spinning. I don't know. I could have sworn. Emily laughed. Sounds like someone's been watching too many horror movies. Everything's fine, Sarah. We're having a great time. I just wanted to check in and make sure Mr. Whiskers isn't giving you too much trouble. We chatted for a few more minutes, but I couldn't shake the uneasy feeling in the pit of my stomach. As I hung up, I noticed something that made my blood run cold. The call timer on the phone showed that this conversation had lasted just over 5 minutes. But the previous call, the scary one, wasn't in the call log at all. I tried to rationalize it. Maybe I had dozed off and dreamed the whole thing. Or maybe there had been a glitch in the phone system. But deep down, I knew something wasn't right. That night, I barely slept. Every creak of the house settling made me jump. I could have sworn I heard footsteps in the hallway, but when I gathered the courage to check, there was nothing there. Just Mr. Whiskers, staring at me with his eerie green eyes. The next morning, I was a wreck. Lack of sleep and paranoia had left me jittery and on edge. I decided to work from a coffee shop, needing to be around people to reassure myself that the world was normal. As I was gathering my things to leave, the landline rang again. I stared at it, my hand hovering over the receiver. On the third ring, I answered. Sarah. Oh, thank God. It was Emily again, panicked, like in the first call. Why are you still there? I told you to leave. Emily, stop it, I snapped, fear making me angry. This isn't funny. You called last night and said everything was fine. What? No, I didn't. Sarah, listen to me. The house isn't safe. There's something static cut through her words. When her voice came back, it was faint, as if she was speaking from very far away. In the walls, don't trust. Coming for. The line went dead. I dropped the phone like it had burned me. This couldn't be happening. I grabbed my cell phone, ready to call the police, our parents, anyone who could help make sense of this madness. But before I could dial, I received a text from Emily's number. Having a great time. Miss you and Mr. Whiskers. See you in a week. Attached was a selfie of Emily and her husband, smiling in front of the Eiffel Tower. The timestamp showed it had been taken just moments ago. I felt like I was losing my mind. How could Emily be calling me in a panic and sending cheerful vacation selfies at the same time? I decided I couldn't stay in the house any longer. I'd go to my parents' place, explain everything. They'd know what to do. But as I reached for the front door, the landline rang again. Against my better judgment, I answered. Don't leave the house. It was Emily's voice, but flat, emotionless. Stay where you are. Everything is fine. "Who is this?" I demanded, my voice shaking. "What's going on?" "I am Emily. Stay in the house. Wait for us to return. Do not leave." The door suddenly slammed shut, the lock clicking into place of its own accord. I dropped the phone and ran to the door, tugging at the handle, but it wouldn't budge. Panic rising in my throat, I ran to the nearest window. But as I reached for the latch, I saw something that turned my blood to ice. My reflection in the glass wasn't me. It was Emily, mimicking my movements, her eyes wide with terror. I stumbled back, my mind refusing to process what I'd seen. This couldn't be real. It had to be a nightmare, a mental breakdown, anything but reality. The landline started ringing again, the shrill sound cutting through the silence of the house. But this time, I could hear it coming from multiple locations. The kitchen, the bedrooms, even the basement. Phones that I knew for a fact didn't exist were all ringing in unison. I ran from room to room, trying to find a way out, but every exit was sealed. Windows wouldn't break, no matter what I threw at them. And everywhere I turned, I caught glimpses of Emily in reflective surfaces, mouthing words I couldn't understand. As I passed a mirror in the hallway, I saw my own reflection for a split second. But it wasn't me as I was now, panic-stricken and disheveled. It was me as I had been when I first arrived at the house, calmly unpacking my bags. The realization hit me like a physical blow. I wasn't just trapped in the house. I was trapped in some kind of loop, doomed to relive these days over and over. And judging by the increasingly frantic phone calls from Emily, I wasn't the first. How many times had she tried to warn herself? How many versions of us were trapped in this nightmare? The ringing phones reached a crescendo, and I clapped my hands over my ears, sinking to the floor. Through the cacophony, I heard the front door open. "Sarah, we're home early." Surprise, it was Emily's voice, cheerful and normal. I looked up to see her and her husband standing in the doorway, suitcases in hand, looking tanned and happy. But their eyes were wrong, empty, like doll's eyes. As they stepped into the house, I saw the world outside shimmer and fade, replaced by an endless void. The house creaked and groaned, reality itself seeming to warp around us. "Welcome home," the thing wearing Emily's face said, its smile too wide, too perfect. "We've been waiting for you to join us. For real this time." I tried to scream, but no sound came out. I felt myself being pulled apart, my consciousness fragmenting. The last thing I saw before everything went dark was Mr. Whiskers, watching impassively from atop the bookshelf, his green eyes glowing with an otherworldly light. And then, like a skipping record, everything reset. I was back at the front door, suitcase in hand, ready to start my house-sitting adventure. But this time, I knew something was terribly wrong. This time, I had to find a way to break the loop, to get a warning out. I picked up the landline and dialed my own number, praying that somehow, some way, I could change the outcome. "Sarah, Sarah, is that you? Listen to me. You need to get out of the house. Now. Don't ask questions, don't pack a bag, just leave. It's not safe." The cycle continues, endless and unbroken. And somewhere in the depths of this twisted reality, Mr. Whiskers watches, guardian and prisoner of a house that hunger never ends.